about the general plan. I don't feel like there are enough residents taking involvement in the general plan or even knowing what is in the general plan. It is absolutely crucial that every resident, I don't know if anyone is watching tonight, but please go and take the survey that is posted online, because your comments matter, and what you post there will deduce what we are going to be doing for the town for the next 10 years. So it's really, really imperative that everyone has their say. One thing I wanted to point out, though, is that beautiful 48 acres, why did everyone move to Carefree? I can pretty much guarantee it was not to live in an overdeveloped area with multiple tract homes crowding with cement from here to there and plowing under the Sonoran Desert and destroying the wildlife habitat. I highly doubt that that's why people moved to Carefree. People moved here because of the semi-rural nature, the closeness to wildlife, the closeness to all of the beautiful mountains and the area that we have around here. And one of the only the last actually accessible areas is that 48 acres. And I think that it would really behoove the town council to work with the residents and listen to what they want. They want open, protected space that we can use for a low maintenance park where residents and visitors alike can go and recreate, have some low maintenance trails, enjoy the scenery. This area is absolutely crucial. It is a wildlife habitat. It is the home of legally protected flora and fauna here in the Sonoran Desert. This is a huge part of the ecosystem, and if we allow another developer to come in and buy up that land and plow it under and put up tract homes, what sort of legacy is that saying to you as a town council? That's saying that you don't care about what the residents think, you're not listening to what we want. Why doesn't Carefree have a park? Cave Creek has a park, Phoenix has lots of parks, Scottsdale. Why doesn't Carefree have a park where residents can go and take advantage of being close to the outdoors? I know there was a huge push to put in sidewalks and things like that. Well, having a park with low maintenance trails that actually take you through the beautiful flora and fauna of the Sonoran Desert, what better way to connect people to the outdoors than that? So anyway, I just wanted to really implore the town council, please listen to what the residents want and keep our open space open. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Colleen Rose Gertie.
Good evening, Mayor Crane and Town Council. When I downloaded the agenda yesterday, I was surprised to see a draft of a possible new program, the Neighborhood Traffic Calming Policy. My first question is, why are you drafting a new policy now when we're currently in the midst of updating our general plan? Don't you think it would have been wise to see how the general plan turns out first? Upon reviewing the draft, I noticed a few things. Under policy goals and objectives, it states the goal is to reduce vehicle speeding and safety concerns, and to ensure that the needs of all stakeholders are met. First off, do we have a speeding issue? I'm not sure about that. Is there any data from the Sheriff's Department to support this view? Second, why do we need to ensure that the needs of all stakeholders are met? If it was about safety for our residents, wouldn't we want to make sure that those residents impacted, their needs were met? You have recently called attention to the stakeholders, but I cannot find on the town website anywhere where it lists the stakeholders, who they are, and are they residents or business owners. I, for one, am very interested to know who they are, since the town council is working to meet their needs. Under program components, you talk about education, enforcement, and engineering. Education sounds reasonable, and residents are encouraged to educate their neighbors. Engineering, on the other hand, once interest has been gathered and supported, contracting a traffic engineering firm will be needed to gather traffic volume and speed data. How much will this cost? Cost unknown. You talk about a shareable funding with the impacted residents. What does that mean? Your step-by-step program lists 6 steps. The resident must initiate contact with the town engineer. That makes sense. Steps 2 and 3 are information gathering between the residents impacted and the town engineer. Then the gathering of traffic data, unknown costs, and who pays. Then more resident involvement with petitions, and the final step, approval by the town council, period. Then there's a note. Construction will be completed at no direct cost to the resident. Okay, so to me that means all the residents will share in the cost for improvements that are meant for only small portions of town, and yet all the residents don't get to vote on it. They just get to pay for it. The pros and cons. Potential benefits: substantially reduces number of speeding vehicles, may reduce number of vehicles on a street. A lot of hopeful thoughts here. Then enhanced neighborhood appeal. And lastly, improved comfort for bicycles and pedestrians. Any data to reflect that. Potential deficiencies: continued speeding vehicles may delay emergency vehicle response. Didn't you just say a few months ago on the property tax issue that our current emergency response times were too slow? Now you're willing to allow them to be even slower under the guise of safety concerns. Increased vehicle noise, everyone loves that. Some homeowners may have to travel through these speed calming devices every time they leave or come home. I'm sure they'll love that. May result in debris accumulation, may detract from neighborhood appeal, and last, may impact driveway access. Any of this makes sense? If you find that these calming methods don't work, after 12 months you can go through this process again to have them removed. Why are you looking to do this now when we're in the process of updating the general plan? Why are you doing it in August when most residents are out of town? And why is it the last item on your agenda when some of the residents may have already left the meeting? And why are we only hearing about it a day or two before tonight's meeting?
Time's up.
Thank
So
you.
please, if you have a closing sentence, you're welcome.
I just did. I was just going to say, as a resident, I would like to see the data first, showing a need for any speed calming devices before I would want to implement a new costly and unnecessary program.
Okay,
Thank you.
Okay, George Nelson.
I have a prepared statement. Thank you for hearing me. In countries like Russia, China, Cuba, and other oligarchies, the residents expect to be ignored and excluded even when 80% of the population disagrees with their government. Fortunately, we live in America, and when we typically embrace a situation like this, we endorse bipartisanship. When this happens, when we don't have bipartisanship, we impeach those that want to be despots and refuse to get the message how they are not representing the people they were elected to represent. After witnessing those that were elected evidently with a deaf ear and blind eyes to represent the residents more than their own agenda, I made it my business to see whether or not I could have productive, purposeful conversations with the two officials who have the most to say. That's our mayor and our town administrator. For anyone that gives a rat's ass about my opinion, I am happy to say that putting past history aside, I look forward to working with both these qualified men for the best interest of Carefree. When I walked into this meeting, I was not aware, and I want the town and the council to know, I am not going to forget this. I am going to address, I've been threatened to be thrown out of this office, out of this meeting. As far as I'm concerned, I'm being slandered. I'm 74 years old. I have never in my entire life have I called people's names, have I lost my temper. To say that I would physically threaten a woman is slanderous to me. And I'm going to want an apology, and I'm going to speak, and if I don't get an apology, there's going to be legal action. To call George Nelson to physically threaten a woman, that goes way beyond the pale. I couldn't agree more with the standard in proper decor for a meeting. No question, I was out of place. I got hot, because when people don't represent us, I got hot, I got emotional. Threaten physically a woman, that's slanderous. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mike Braun.
I wasn't threatened, so. Anyhow, my comments are more general. They do not have anything to do with the agenda tonight or with the agenda of last week or whatever. But tonight you did read the call to public. I find that somewhat offensive. And it doesn't generate a friendly feeling of conversation, which is what I would like to see between the townspeople out here and the council up there. And in fact, I would make a suggestion that maybe we could have what I would call a town meeting, not in the council chambers, away from here, maybe in the pavilion that you're naming tonight or renaming, et cetera, where there can be a free give and take on one topic. You'd have to limit it to one topic or else everybody'd be all over the place. But I'm wondering whether the mayor and the council would be willing to have an open conversation where we don't talk at you and you don't talk at us, we talk together. And maybe we could figure out that we're all in this together. We all are residents of this town. And I want to compliment the council on the last meeting, because I thought each of you gave your opinions your own personal opinions as to adding a council member for the vacant seat. I thought that was very good. It let you become human to us, so to speak, okay? And whether everyone likes Mr. Miller or not is immaterial, okay? Because you aren't going to please everybody. We all know that. But I would like to suggest that you entertain an idea of an open town hall meeting where we could have a conversation. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any others who would wish to speak at call to the public? Right, so that closes call to the public. Next up on the agenda, we go into the regular agenda, and that's current events. So Vice Mayor has some current events.
Yes. The staff has been working on an official public meeting policy. Can you guys hear me? And it'll be presented at the next council meeting. But tonight I'd like to read one critical section of it addressing response to disruptions. So the response disruption plan is A, identification of disruptive behavior. Trained staff members and presiding officers shall be responsible for identifying disruptive behavior during public meetings. Common signs of disruption may include shouting, using offensive language, engaging in personal attacks, or engaging in activities that substantially disrupt the meeting. B, warning and intervention. When disruptive behavior is observed, the presiding officer or designated staff member shall issue an initial verbal warning to the individuals involved, reminding them of the meeting rules and the potential consequences of continued disruptions. Instances of disruptive behavior shall be documented. C, removal procedures. If disruptive behavior persists or escalates despite the initial warnings, the presiding officer, in consultation with designated staff and/or security personnel, shall have the authority to make the decision to remove the disruptive individual or individuals from the meeting. The removal process shall prioritize maintaining order and the safety of all attendees. Detailed records of the removal process shall be maintained, including the reason for removal, actions taken, and individuals involved. D, communication and follow-up. Attendees shall be informed of the meeting rules and expectations prior to the start of the meeting. The consequences for disruptive behavior, including removal and potential bans, shall be clearly communicated to attendees. Means of continued engagement with the community shall be utilized to further provide further information or updates. Thank you.
Okay. Hey, so on another note, so beginning on September 8th, I'm going to start doing like a Meet the Mayor in the Visitor Center. So we'll do the first one on September 8th. That's a Friday. It'll go from, say, 9 o'clock to 11. It's a farmer's market. You can go to the farmer's market as well. And we'll see how that goes. And depending on feedback, we can adjust the hours. We can do it, we can vary hours so we can be inclusive to everyone. To Mr. Braun's comment, so it's not a meeting with all the council, but I'm welcome to bring along as many as 2 other council people, and we can talk to each other. And we won't limit it to one discussion item. We'll limit it to what's on your mind. Any other current events? Item number 6, review and discussion related to the general plan update process is led by Matt Klasko, Michael Baker International, to include an overview of feedback from recent community workshops, presentation of draft structure and document outline, and discussion of key issues and working solutions. Matt.
Great. Well, thank you, Mayor and Council. I was last before you back in May to give an update on the status of the general plan. So you can imagine we've been busy, as I know you all are aware, since that time. So as the Mayor kind of summarized in the opening comments, that that I'll be taking you through some specific update But within that context, I wanted to naturally focus in some key areas. And so my comments are going to first touch on process and outreach. So we'll naturally share where we are in the process and how we've come along in terms of our outreach efforts. But then I'm going to transition into talking about some key issue areas. What have we heard out of that outreach? And we've categorized those into some broad common areas. And so you can see that on the slide, that they're really geared around 5 topic areas that we received the most feedback on. Naturally, open space. We've heard about some of those comments tonight. Town fiscal responsibility and economic development, water, our semi-rural character, and traffic. There is not to say that there's other topics out there. There certainly are. But in terms of some broad themes, those are some areas that I wanted to touch on and set the tone in terms of what we're hearing from the public. Then from there, I'm going to transition into giving a little update on the structure of the general plan. Last we met, we talked about bringing this topic to the residents for their input, so we have some of that input. I'll share with you tonight where that direction is leading, and then I'll close with next steps. What I want to emphasize, though, before I move on, is tonight's conversation is not about making any decisions. It's not about making any recommendations. What I'm going to do tonight is simply give information so that the council has an opportunity to understand where the public is coming from on certain topics, and that you can ask or provide myself and the team feedback on what are some things relative to these topics or subject matters that you might be interested in, that you might like to be answered, so that when we come back before you, and we're tentatively looking at adding another work session in September to come back to council with some true drafted specific language that then we are going to ask about direction and feedback and opinion. So tonight's about setting a foundation, giving council an opportunity to hear where things are, ask some clarifying questions, or request some more information be obtained, so that then we all feel like we can make educated decisions moving forward. So I just wanted to put that disclaimer there that that tonight it's all iterative, right? We're trying to build, and so this is one more step in that overall process. Questions or thoughts before I move on? Okay, thank you. So use this slide a lot, so probably not I would say pretty familiar to most, I think, is our process slide. So our little tiny yellow triangle continues to press along the timeline here. And you can see that we're far into our enrich phase. So again, last time we met, we were just coming out of our recognize phase. Now we've completed community workshops 1 through 4. And all of those workshops lead into the 60-day review process that is noted as that last task item under the enrich phase. So that 60-day review process, where we have a complete draft of the document for public review and comment, will be conducted over October and November. So you can all understand that we have August and September to finalize our final kind of inputs so that we can be as far along as we can for that draft. And that's my personal goal, or our focus, is to try and get this 60-day review draft further along than what we might see in some other communities that we work in, because I think it will help the conversation more to have a more definitive draft document earlier in the process, to give us more time to vet any refinements as we move along. So once we get out of that enrich phase, come December, close to the end of the year, as we all have heard me say before, we then will get into the more refinement and formal adoption process by May, and then that, if the plan is adopted, sets the stage for putting it on the November 2024 ballot for voter ratification. So, as I mentioned, we've conducted 4 community workshops up to this point. This slide just gives a very broad recap of those 4 workshops. So you can see within each title, it gives a little bit of the focus of that particular workshop. And then all of our workshops have had 2 components, right? An in-person meeting followed by a virtual meeting for any of those who weren't able to attend. So you can see the attendance are those numbers that are associated with the in-person or virtual. And so through all of those workshops, we continue to ask residents, give us your comments, tell us how we can do better. And we've received those, and we've heard from residents, particularly about making the website more user-friendly. And so I have one picture here, it's small to see, but of the refined website to continue that process of listening to residents and where we have the opportunity to make those pivots and try to make the process more user-friendly. So the website was updated. We even in our last workshop transitioned to utilizing YouTube and live streaming. So we are, hopefully the residents feel we're not just asking for input for the sake of input, we're responding to that input. And then with that, we did extend the online period for comments for our workshops 1 through 3. So you can see that they actually closed yesterday. And now Community Workshop 4 is open through August. And the reasoning for that goes back to my comment of we have 2 months now to start really drafting this plan. And so at some point, we do have to draw the line in terms of moving on to writing and not just reviewing comments that residents share. So it's not to say that we won't be collecting any more comments or doing any more refinements, but in terms of those specific workshops, we wanted to close them so that then we can create the report to then share all the feedback that we got out of it. If we wait, then it just creates bottlenecks and challenges with the schedule overall. So I just wanted to pause on this slide in terms of outlining the different workshops that we've conducted to this point to collect all of the feedback that we've received, and we're still, again, encourage residents to get into the community workshop number 4 and provide their feedback on that if they have not done so to this point. I'd also add that while you see some totals up there, not everyone signs in when we ask in terms of the in-person meetings, and they're not required to technically sign in, if you will, virtually. So those numbers are pretty close to what we've had, but they are not accurate in terms of the total numbers that did participate if they didn't sign in or didn't necessarily provide all of their information relative to the online surveys.
Yeah, but just one
Yes,
comment. So if you go
of
back
course.
there, so you see it, even if everyone doesn't sign in, what you do see is the numbers falling off. This goes to a comment that was made, a call to the public. So we have I think we have one more workshop. So that's it in terms of workshops for the public.
And that's a great clarification, Mayor, is that, yes, in terms of the overall scope, we have scheduled one more workshop that would be conducted during that 60-day review, obviously to allow the opportunity of not only just putting the document out for comment and just collecting them, virtually, but to have an in-person meeting where residents can come, ask questions, and give feedback. So that 5th meeting occurs during the 60-day review. Typically, and what we scoped for this project is that then after the 60-day review, we transition into that adoption process where we're having workshops and public hearings. So those become the format for that public engagement and the continuation of feedback. So while we do have one more dedicated community workshop, we do have more public meetings to hear input and understand how we continue to evolve in terms of that.
Yes, I would just say that it's really important for us as a town to really beat the drum and get the word out on this last workshop because that kind of workshop would be the last of its kind, and the other ones will be a different animal.
Yeah, and I give kudos, thank you, Mayor, to,
I turned it on, so if the battery's dead.
all right, Gary Neese, if anyone asks. No, just kidding. Oh, well played, well played. Yes, for anyone online, we want them to be able to hear. So I'll continue my comments, but yes, it is important that we continue to beat that drum of getting feedback. But I give kudos to the town and staff for filling the communication role, and so Brianna's doing a great job. She's back there, and so I'm encouraged that we'll continue to be more robust in that notification process.
So, I just have a question of how we can get more people involved. I mean, we're doing everything we can to get the word out, and we're still getting really small response. And this is a huge thing that's getting ready to happen. I'm wondering if we can use our visitor center, have somebody sitting out there with signs saying, come in and look at the general plan. Just a better way maybe of engaging with the town folk and getting input.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor. We always have a mindset, right, on how we can get more residents to the table. And so I would agree that we're happy to work with staff on how we might expand that, whether we want to have more pop-up booths at the post office like we did at the onset to inform them, and at what stage in the process would that be most valuable. My gut right now says, at the 60-day review, so that they have a concrete document. If their time doesn't allow them to be as engaged at this phase, it might be most productive, for example, for them to comment on a full document than earlier. But for what it's worth, and I'm not trying to make excuses in terms of being satisfied, these numbers are very good numbers in terms of what we see for general plans in even larger communities. It's a struggle to get people to attend meetings when we're talking about the general plan. We're doing 4 of these right now, all in larger communities, and I don't get the participation even that we're seeing in these numbers. So I don't think that's a reason to suggest that we should just stop trying. So I'm all for doing more, but I would also say that at some point there's a threshold, right, in a lot of things of we just start getting the same comments, only just a larger volume. So I think we'll continue to explore with staff to follow council's direction of how we can get the word out even more, and hope that what we are hearing is a great synopsis of what those residents who may not be engaged are thinking.
And you have a lot more experience than we do, so if you have ideas that we haven't tried, and share them with Gary or with Bree. And
Yes, we'd be happy to see how we might incorporate that into the timeline again, balancing, right, needing to kind of turn that corner of writing, and still will keep an ear to the ground in terms of listening.
Matt,
What, oh, sorry, well, go ahead.
okay, since we're on the slide, you have closed 731 for 1 through 3, which I know the survey's closed, but people are still able to view the virtual meetings.
Great point of clarification. I would not want people to think, yes. So the survey aspect in terms of providing their feedback is closed, but you are absolutely correct. They can still go on and see what was discussed. And again, closing that survey would just be, we want to be able to share the feedback with residents. And so we would be put in that position of, well, we can share the feedback, but we wouldn't go back and add feedback to it after the fact. So I would hate for residents to take 30 minutes of their time or more, and then us not report it. So that's why we do close it, so that we can then report it and share it with all, but that's an excellent point of clarification. All of the content is still there for access.
For a town this size, what would be a representative sample of input? I mean, we've got less than 100 people in most of these things, so we're 3,800 residents. What would you expect to be a representative sample so that we know that we are getting a good cross-section?
Yeah, when we look at like a statistically valid survey, as when we started this process, right, we had a community survey, and that wasn't a statistically valid survey, but the sample size was valid in terms of the size of the community, and so we were up around 350, would give confidence that we've heard from a significant portion of the community. So yes, these numbers are far short of that. But when we do work on general plans, we find that a lot of residents lean on other residents in the community for their conduit, if you will. So I would even offer that some of these numbers, there's a lot of other individuals behind those numbers, if that makes sense. It's just, our circle of friends, right? And within our circle of friends, we have that one individual that's up to speed on things. And so I'll reach out to Bob and ask Bob what's going on, and then I'll share my input with Bob and think, okay, Bob has it covered for me, so I'm good. So that's some of the anecdotal kind of comments I'll share. To be blunt, there's no magic number of once we hit this, we've heard from the community. I think, again, in terms of the topics that we're seeing, we're to that point where, as I look at all the different ones, there hasn't been a large grouping of a new topic. There might be a new comment that said, you know what, that's a really great idea. Let's kind of dig deeper on that. So we're always eager to hear those, but we can still get those through the process. It's really if we haven't unpacked some major issue, and I'd like to think all those key ones that are most important to those in the audience tonight have been uncovered. And I'm sure residents will let me know if that's not the case. So.
Matt, is there any weight or consideration given to permanent versus non-permanent residents that take the survey? Refresh me, is that distinguished in the survey?
We, in the community survey, we did ask residents if they wanted to self-identify whether they were permanent or part-time residents. But in all of these community workshops, there was no distinction whether you were a full-time resident or a part-time resident or renter. It was if you reviewed the survey and provided your comments. Okay, should I go back to the podium or just hang out here? Okay, all right. Does that work for everybody? Okay. You don't have to look at the back of me. All right, so moving on then to get into the key issue, or as you see on the slide, areas for feedback. So again, these are all not specific comments from residents. These are kind of summarized comments that we saw most frequently within then broader topics. So again, open space was the topic that we heard the most about. Hence, we had a standalone community workshop on open space. But we heard tonight, we've heard throughout this process, preserve the 48 acres, and that number also changes. State land called it the 50-acre parcel, right? And we've heard others refer to it in different phrases, but I think everybody knows what we mean, that that 48-acre trust land is an area of emphasis. When we explicitly asked what types of uses for that, or what we would be most comfortable, we're hearing most view that 48 acres as more of a passive recreation type of use. Hiking trails, kiosks of maybe informational content, ramada, benches, those types of things. Beyond just the 48 acres, though, we did hear a lot about the qualification, if you will, of when we asked what type of open space are you looking for in Carefree. A lot of it was just, well, it depends. We overall prefer natural areas, right? But many did say in certain situations and for certain needs, we could see active recreational. So it wasn't a landslide all for one or the other, but it definitely was more of a preservation with maybe some passive recreational uses, but in certain instances might be open to something more active, but where and how that happens matters. Also, ownership may be flexible. I thought it was very interesting to see residents' comments when we asked about, is it public or private? And residents were very quick to say, well, it could be both. So it's not even one or the other. It might be a hybrid of a public-private partnership, but what we were hearing from residents is, let's be creative. Let's look at various options in terms of how we might approach open space preservation within the community. But obviously within that conversation, whether it's publicly owned, some private entity, or a public-private partnership, it needs to work towards having it open or available to the public if it's not just for sheer conservation purposes. So I think that was an important component. And then last, maybe the biggest one that I would say from a thought-provoking standpoint from a council perspective is be proactive, more specific language with action statements and less wishy-washy statements. And so some context to that is we heard a lot about the general plan uses those encourage, strive to achieve, and words that aren't completely committal to something. And so we're hearing from residents that, particularly in open space, but you might even extend this to the other topics we see here, is that they are looking for the general plan to commit the town to some more substantial commitments. And within that context, taking some of the shoulds to shalls, for example. And when pressed, when I talk to some residents and share that now the general plan is a policy document, so that's why you get the wishy-washy language, is because the documents that come after that are the ones that implement it. Those are the ones without the wishy-washy. But residents then push back to me and say, but Matt, that doesn't mean that we can't still say what we want in the general plan. And so I think that's right how we thread the needle, and an example of when we come back, some of those points of decision making is where we might be willing or able to commit the town to something, and then where we might make it an action of, okay, we can't necessarily commit the town to saying we're going to go do this or do that, but we might say we'll do this step to work towards doing that. And that's where the actions come in, because right now the general plan doesn't have action statements. It has policies. And so I think adding some action statements of a to-do list can also go a long way. And so obviously that to-do list is going to commit the town to things. And so looking at that will be another example of where we'll be presenting ideas to council, and then you'll give us, your insight on that. So
I would just say it's not unheard of. If you look at other general plans, they have sometimes strong language, shalls and wills.
Exactly. So well said, Mayor, in that there is no rule that says we can't be specific in the general plan. I would just hate to suggest that that a policy document is the same as an ordinance. But that said, something that's voted on by the public, right, I think will hold a lot of weight. And so by the plan saying that's a shall or a will, and knowing that the public then ratified it, certainly gives strong direction to where the town wants to go.
Yeah, I mean, this is what we talked a lot about at the last meeting when you presented to the town council, is that I was talking about how we say these things like encourage and strive to and everything, yet the problem is that we have to marry public policy with fiscal policy. And that is sorely lacking in our country, like our federal government, for decades. So I am very sensitive to that, and I want to make sure that if we are putting action items in, that we can actually back that up with fiscal policy. And so with a small town and limited resources, that's very difficult. And I don't want us to overpromise and then not be able to deliver because we don't have money to spend on some of these things. And I don't know what, you know, the future will bring, but that was the one thing that we talked a lot about last time, is that we have to be able to, if we're gonna make, you know, head down a path of a promise, we have to make sure that we can deliver.
And
that's very difficult when you're looking out 10 years.
And that was very eloquently said, because that is spot on where I get nervous, is exactly what you're saying of, I would hate to commit to something and then find out that it's just not possible. Or that it would put the town in a very difficult financial situation, and now we're hyper-focused on this. And so that's a perfect example where actions can come into play, and that we'll have to use to share with the public about why we're doing it that way. And so that would be almost one of the primary reasons why we might not make something a shall, because we don't have all the facts ready to do that. But then what we can say is, however, we're not saying we ignore you. We're going to our action items and saying we're going to investigate how we can afford this, or we're going to put a committee together to determine how to do X, Y, and Z, and then make a determination. So at least put us on the board of doing something, but that it's not a policy to say we shall do it. We're going to do these steps to get to it. Okay? So that's a good segue then maybe to town fiscal responsibility and economic development, that we heard a lot from residents. Even when we ask specific questions in other areas of the plan, we'll get comments that circle back to this notion of want to do this, want to do that, but also want to make sure that the town is fiscally responsible, and that kind of ties into economic development. So some of the comments that we hear a lot about within that topic is keep town government small and be transparent. And so, you know, exploring what residents' definitions of small is always going to be a moving target, I think. But the being transparent part is hopefully this general plan is one of those steps, you know, in that process. And so having additional policy and action items to support those types of things could go a long way in the general plan. Balance between economic development and residents' quality of life. Keep economic development consistent with the general plan. So we are hearing feedback about thoughts that the existing general plan gives guidance on economic development, and that we want to make sure that what the general plan is sharing relative to economic development is being used to guide our efforts in that arena, if you will. So within that economic development topic, then, we naturally hear about two of the more prominent corners within town, and that's focus. We hear encouraging comments about focus on developing that northeast corner of Carefree Highway and Cave Creek Road, but then conversely, some hesitation or uncertainty about the northwest corner of Carefree Highway and Tom Darlington. So again, broader topics about just how we're balancing the town's fiscal responsibility with economic development and what that means for specific locations. So we're going to be crafting some language that we think hopefully will respond to those comments, but we're going to have to work with council, as the process moves along to get back to that thought about making sure what we're committing to is something that the town can fiscally uphold. Now, within some of the other topics, maybe not as frequent feedback, but certainly just as top of mind is water. Typically, we hear a lot of comments on water, but it's more broad in two sense. We need to conserve what we have, and then we need to make sure that we have enough for what we're planning on doing. And I don't think that's, a pretty, or I guess that's a pretty reasonable way to look at it of let's, as I chuckled when we were working on Cave Creek's general plan, we talked about water at that time, and one of the quotes from a council member that I like to use everywhere is just use water like you live in the desert. And if we all do that, we're going to be in better shape. And I think it's a very simple statement, but can go a long way. And so promote water conservation, I think, is something that the community would support or does support. And then, of course, the natural concern with everything that we're hearing relative to water is to make sure that our supplies can support our projected growth. And so we're working with the Carefree Water Company to meet state law in terms of what the general plan needs to address in terms of water, but it does need to hit three things: how much water you have today in terms of your water rights, how much water you're using, and then how much water you think you're going to need in the future, and how you're going to get the difference. So I think a lot of the topics that residents are concerned about, state law already says the general plan needs to address. So I'm fairly confident we'll address those, but how they align with the community's expectation we'll continue to evaluate. The semi-rural character. Again, this is something that I think everyone in the community holds closest in terms of the as we heard in some of the comments this afternoon, in terms of why one would move to Carefree, that semi-rural character was certainly one of the distinguishing factors or highest on the list. And so retaining that low-density character is important. I think for us as planners, we're looking at qualifying what that means. Right? So I read that and I go, well, I can take low density to Scottsdale, and that's going to mean something totally different to them than what low density to Carefree means. So when we see these comments, we're qualifying it in our mind of, at any point in the years after, people come and go, and so you need the general plan to be clear on what we mean by low density, and so those are areas that we're going to be looking at. We hear a lot about, view sheds or view corridors, and this notion of tall buildings blocking those views. So we did hear about no more 3-story buildings. And so how the general plan addresses that topic, I could see as an example of a decision point, right? And so that's something that we'll probably need more conversation on, and how absolute we're able to be on that particular topic. And then light pollution. I think this is something that is a worthwhile topic up in the Carefree Cave Creek area. There is an opportunity to preserve our night sky up here, and so light pollution, I think, is something that we see some opportunity to bolster the general plan, but how we and how far we take that, again, is an area that we'll look for guidance from council as we make some recommendations and see if that's enough or if we need more. And then last, in terms of traffic congestion, yes, I see traffic on the agenda tonight, so I would say that this is just in a vacuum, that we know traffic was discussed in the last general plan, and so the notion that that the town is moving through that topic makes sense, but in terms of the topics that we've heard relative to the general plan is this constant notion of lower speeds, and certainly I think that matters on where you live in the community, and naturally some roads are you'll probably find higher volumes of cars, obviously, and then higher speeds than other roads. That's married up with some residents saying, yeah, we need lower speeds, but maybe it's an enforcement condition. Roundabouts, you see plus and minus there. That's because we receive comments of favoring roundabouts over some other type of intersection, but then others not wanting to see any roundabouts. And so I don't think the general plan would really get into the dynamic of specifying a roundabout. It's not intended to be that specific, but we would, I think we would not be sharing the feedback if we didn't at least say we received comments and multiple comments on that. One lane through the town center, I know that's a topic for conversation, and again, you see pluses and minuses there. We see some feeling like the lane markings are confusing, and so one lane would be advantageous, and others obviously stating that reduction of a lane creates additional traffic concerns. So again, the general plan, I personally think is not necessarily the tool to get into the details on picking a winner or a loser on such a finite topic, but it would again give direction on how to go about looking at those topics and making sure that certain aspects are accounted for, i.e. One through lane or roundabout. So if those are considered, these elements should be further considered as an example. And then last, improve sidewalks and parking in the town center. So, you know, it's great to hear that. I know some residents aren't going to be happy about this, but it's great to hear that we have a parking problem in the town center, because that means that businesses are doing well. And way back when we originally assisted on the revitalization plan, that was part of the component is parking wasn't as much of a concern then as I'm hearing now. And so hopefully that's a good sign for businesses, but we need to respond to residents. So again, these are all a snapshot of a much longer list of very detailed comments that we appreciate residents sharing. And so the intent here is, given that we closed the feedback for community workshops 1 through 3, is to get all of that input in a report that would be then put on the project website. And so all residents, all staff, all council can see exactly the feedback we received in terms of the exercises, but then the individual comments. So again, harking back to that, be transparent, and so we share this feedback because I want to set the tone of when we come back, hopefully in September, is that, again, we'll have some language and then we'll share that language in advance of the meeting, and be looking to have more deeper conversations about a specific language at that time. But up until that point, we're going to continue to work with residents. I probably maybe will regret it in the morning, but I'm having one-on-one meetings with residents if requested. So feel free to reach out if you want to talk about a topic. I'm here to listen as part of the broader team, because that's the only way we're going to get this to the finish line, right? Is to make sure everybody feels that they've been heard, and then conversely, why we are unable to do something specific or not. Before I move on, I'll just pause to see if there's any follow-up questions to these topics or any other questions about comments in general.
I'm just glad water is a big topic to be included. I don't know how deep you're gonna go or what data you're gonna include from the water company, but I'm glad to see it.
Yes, certainly, we're again doing multiple general plans across the state, and not a single one of them is water not a primary topic.
Matt,
Yes.
clarification. In the first category here, what is a structured active open space?
Yeah, so when we were in our community workshop for open space, we wanted to take the public through some exercises that could help us start to visualize when they say that they want open space, what is the residents' viewpoint and definition of open space compared to mine, compared to yours. And so we just compared some kind of forced choice, if you will, of asking, do you like natural open space versus structured open space? So that would be, natural would be, don't touch it. It's there to look at, and that's all it is. To structured is, does it have improvements on it? So would it, and that, is the baseline ask right there. So we could have stopped right there if everyone said, we just want passive. We want open space that you look at and you don't touch. Or is there some open space that is structured? It might have a parking lot. It might have benches. Then active open space is actually, instead of having a passive trail that you're hiking on, would it have recreational fields? Would it have a sport court? Would it have pickleball? Some more specific active recreation type of efforts than something more passive like just a hiking trail. So, all right. So moving on then to talk about the structure of the general plan. So last we met, we talked about how we craft the general plan in some ways does impact the readability, right, of the plan and how user-friendly it is. And so council had asked us to take this topic to the public, and so in community workshop number 3, we did ask the question about, here's the format of our existing general plan, which follows that element or chapter approach where every required element is a chapter, and then there's goals associated with that. We presented that general outline in terms of utilizing the required elements per state law as chapters of the plan, and thus how the plan is organized as one option for the structure of the general plan. But we also looked at a thematic approach, which is something we're seeing in more current general plans, is moving away from utilizing the chapter and element approach to a theme approach that speaks more to what's important to the community, and then respond to the state statute within those themes. And so what you see on the slide is when we asked that question, 70% of respondents, both in person and online up to this point. So again, it's not closed, but we're hearing that the majority favor a theme approach, and these 3 themes are what were put for consideration, not as an absolute, but these 3 themes is what was put in the online survey for consideration to allow residents to evaluate it. And so at this point in time, because we're trying to, start to draft the plan, we are working towards this theme approach by utilizing a set of themes that more uniquely express what is important to Carefree. And then I think what we're looking to do is we're trying to make everybody happy, is balance things out. We still had members of the community feel strongly that the element approach is the best approach. And so what I would say within this theme approach, you can see our thought processes: have an introduction, set the stage, then we have our themes, but within those themes, we tuck in those elements. So the elements still exist, they'll still have a presence, you'll still be able to understand where they are discussed in the plan, but they're not going to just be elevated to a chapter, if you will. The chapter will be focused on what that overall chapter is trying to achieve. So when we talk about a scenic community character, you can see that the required elements that are most conducive to that would be land use, growth, and circulation. When we talk about open space and environmental stewardship, naturally open space, environmental, and water resources fall under that. And then prosperity and fiscal stability is our public services, facilities, and costs of development. So I don't think it's, a stretch to see that could be a great kind of happy medium. And I think we can make a really fantastic plan within this context. So I'll pause there and see if there's any thoughts or comments, but that's kind of where we're tracking at this point in time.
I think we're good.
Okay. Well, I think with that, I'll just close with next steps. Again, trying to always make sure that everyone's aware and understands the kind of incremental steps we're going through. So with having this workshop tonight, we're going to have another work session with the Planning and Zoning Commission on the 14th, and we're going to basically give them almost the identical presentation that we went over tonight, and with the same direction in terms of not looking for direction or decisions, but asking if you have any thoughts that in order for you to formulate an opinion, you'd really like to hear X or Y, now's the time to share that with us, or certainly share a comment with staff that then they can relay it to us. But the point is that we want everyone to feel like they have the information they need to make a decision, but we're not trying to get anybody, whether it's from a public or from an elected position, to feel like they're being forced into a decision before they have all the facts. So we're looking to have those follow-up then work sessions with council early in September, and then the following week with the Planning and Zoning Commission. So you'll see the timing of that is critical in terms of it's early enough in September that we can gain any feedback to finalize the document before it goes out for its 60-day review period starting in October. So again, we're trying to get a little more aggressive in this draft of the plan. Typically, we would say we'll clean up those things in the 60-day review period. But for this one, I'd really like to get the plan as far along as we can for that 60-day review, and then spend those 2 months refining things instead of almost reconstructing something that we missed. And then, as I mentioned before, that community workshop number 5 will be as early as we can get it in that review process. So we're not holding an informational meeting, at the back end of the 2-month review period. We're going to hold it early on and give residents time to then go back in the document. So with that, Mayor, I'll turn it over for any final comments or direction.
Yeah, so just one question, so we set expectations for the council and the public. So at the September council work session, will you present us with like a rough draft of the general plan, or what should we expect?
Yeah,
different than
so
tonight?
I think we're looking to have a complete text draft. So it wouldn't have the formatting, the pretty pictures, all of that. We're looking to have done by the end of this month in order to bring certain parts of it. So we're not looking to bring the entire text draft per se to council at our next meeting. You're trying to take down an elephant with that. What we're trying to do is just cherry pick, in terms of those topics, some key decision areas that we might say, here's a goal, and here's some policies with that goal, and here's some action items that support that policy and goals. What does council think about this approach? Because we're trying to address these comments. And then that's the opportunity that council can say, well, I don't know if we can really commit to that policy, so can we maybe shift it and make an action item so that we can make sure that we can then commit to something? Or, you know what, I think we don't even need that action item. We're ready to just make it a policy. So that would be the type of selective feedback we would be looking for. Is we would go into the draft document, pull out areas that we think are most important or committing the town the most, and have that for conversation. But you would see the goal, the policy, and the action with it, so you can see the whole context, and then hopefully have good dialogue on how we feel about it.
Yeah, so my suggestion would be that when you have that done, it's in our packet rather than just presenting it to us cold, and presenting it to the public cold on the day of the council meeting.
Bingo. So I agree, I completely agree, and that's why we were pushing ourselves to have a draft of the whole plan by the end of this month, so that we internally see the whole picture. Because if I just go draft something on open space, give it to us, we might start drafting other areas and think, oh, you know what? Now that I've drafted this, I want to go back into open space and massage some things. So we're putting ourselves on notice to get it done by the end of this month from a text standpoint, so that we can share those comments in advance. And we're looking to hopefully give at least 2 weeks lead time so that everyone can absorb it.
Any other questions or comments?
Yeah, just one. As you're going through the text and the English of the document, if you will, just one thought. Plain English, simple English, just a little anecdotal. I was around when the SEC cracked down on corporations because our public filings contained, I used to call it psychobabble.
Right.
And then they said, you gotta write plain English, guys. So, I mean, I'm not saying you can't use the new words, but to the extent, there's a long ways between shall and a promise and would like to.
Right. Yeah, I think we heard, I appreciate that input. I know as a planner, we can sometimes get caught up in our terminology. So it was, kind of brought to my attention in our last meeting where I think I casually mentioned view shed, and then had a lot of residents come up to me after the fact and ask what view shed, what I meant by that. So I completely agree with you. I will say, to be fully transparent, that we'll look to residents as well to help us refine where that is. We'll give it our best shot, but we'll always take input on how we might simplify any terminology or just use a better phrase. But I completely agree that there's no need to write a paragraph if you can say it in a sentence.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? Hey, Matt. Well, good job. Thank you.
All right.
You're
Well,
really
thank
doing
you.
good work for us.
Okay. Gary, the microphone's yours.
Okay, agenda item number 7. Brief economic development update and review and discussion on the economic development 24-month work plan. Steve Popopek.
Mayor, Council, thank you. For those in the audience, I'm Steve Prokopek. I'm the Economic Development Director for the town of Carefree. Been here for about 3 years now. And, and so when when I first came on, the town council had put together its own work plan and action items and things that were important and pillars to what you guys wanted to accomplish. And one of those was fiscal responsibility and economic development. And as part of that, there was a requirement for an economic development work plan. And the way we've approached the economic development work plan is to look at it in 24-month periods, so that way we can keep things manageable, the documents aren't massively huge, and we can stay on top of the tasks that we wanted to do with any 24-month period, but it always references back to some other document, whether that's the general plan or it's going to be the redevelopment plan. And so that's kind of where we get our guidance for what we're doing in economic development, and that then translates into the to-do list as part of the 24-month business plan. And so one of the things that, I've been talking with economic development, and I think there's a misconception of kind of a lot of things, and how it plays into why we're here and why economic development is important. So I'm going to take a step back and just do a little bit of history, and particularly because we do have a lot of residents that are new. And I do think that, and especially a lot of residents that are new, that are interested in what's going on in the town and the investment they've made inside the community. And one of those is understanding that Carefree actually does have two beginnings. One beginning is Carefree, which was the master plan community that was built as an unincorporated, basically master plan community in Maricopa County. And as such, it was an area funded by property tax, and you got limited service. And at that point, it was about 1.8 million people in Maricopa County that subsidized all the street repairs and the services that we got, less fire. And so that it's kind of that's the start. And when you used to hear that, Tom Darlington and KT Palmer, that's the Carefree that they created. This was a development, and it wasn't the entirety of the area. It was just a smaller portion that we see at Concludes Town Center, kind of going down towards Tom Darlington and Carefree Highway as well. And so in 1984, the town decided, or the residents in the area decided that they were really, really fearful that now they would become like Scottsdale. They literally were afraid that they were going to become Scottsdale. And so they decided and went out and knocked on door to door and got signatures to incorporate and create a municipal corporation. And what that fundamentally did was take away the idea that this area was funded by property taxes and limited service and limited control, but it placed it now from the 1.8 million residents to the 1,300 residents that were here at the time to be able to take the responsibility for how to pave the roads and take care of everything, and how you provide government in a local area. And so that is the town of Carefree, which is uniquely different than Carefree. And I don't think a lot of people really generally understand that fundamental difference, and that we're not like Rio Verde, or we're not like New River, or those areas that still are areas defined but still inside unincorporated Maricopa County. So they'd have a different structure. One of the other factors that's important as we look through incorporation is that they did create their first municipal plan, which was prior to when general plans were required. And I just wanted to list some stuff. I'm not going to talk through the slides. I think people can read them. But the idea was that this was to be a unique community. They understood that tourism and bringing people in was a huge part, because the fundamental change that we had was when we went from property tax funded, it went to a sales tax funded community. And so that is the big fundamental change. And part of what goes into that now goes to what Councilmember Almarosa had mentioned, was now you really have to look at how you tie the general plan to the revenues that you receive, and how you're providing services and how you're providing infrastructure. You're in the county, you're paying property taxes, they took care of all that. Now we're responsible for how all that fits together. And it's not an easy puzzle to put together, because you have to make some tough decisions that maybe you didn't necessarily have to make under the original Carefree. And so the other thing that's interesting, that when we look at how, when they founded their town in 1984, that this town was founded without a fire department. That is something that we fundamentally added on, and did add to significant costs. And it's a significant service, because prior to that, everybody was paying for either subscription service or they didn't have fire service. And so I just want to lay that out there, because I don't know if a lot of people understand that. And when I do explain it, people are like, wow, I wish I really would have known that information. So, and I wanted to kind of show this. This is something that came directly out of the 1988 master plan. And this is not my words, it's not Gary's words, it's nobody's words. These are the words of the people who actually went door to door. And one of the things that they recognized was that when they took on the responsibility, there was two things they had to focus on. Either you got to figure out a way to pay for it with individual property taxes, or you got to figure out how to pay for it by being able to use economic development. And what they realized is at the time that most people don't want to make those decisions if they don't have to make that decision, because they're hard decisions to make. And so they kind of punt that along the way. Well, one of the fundamental things that you'll find when you look into that plan is they were very conscious that a lot of the revenue they were getting was from one-time money, in particular construction sales tax. And growth was really funding Carefree through that time. So you could look at that as recurring revenue coming in just like you'd look at any other recurring revenue. Our problem is that as we've come to the point where we're getting near functional build-out, that revenue stream isn't really a recurring revenue stream, and it's a shortfall that we're going to have to deal with. And so we're getting to that point that I think these guys in 1985 somewhat punted all the way down to this road here, down the road to this point here. And so this is where it's time to make those tough decisions. And as you can see in the budget here, municipal sales tax is a huge portion of what we collect and what's part of our budget and what funds everything. The vast majority of that is not funded by Carefree residents. It's funded by people who come from the outside, predominantly Lowe's. I would say that we've seen an uptick in probably online sales, people buying stuff from their homes because we collect on that. And then we look in the middle, and this is from Gary's presentation. This just shows you that back in 1985, when there weren't that many roads, there weren't that many drainage issues, there weren't that many people complaining about things. And considering that less than half of the residents that listed as residents, as about 40%, were actually registered voters. So most people weren't even full-time residents or even consider this home. But now you can see the challenge that we have as far as being able to take on all the infrastructure. And then also you can look then at the anticipated expenses. Obviously public safety with fire and county and the sheriff's office is really what drives the vast majority of our budget. So here's the considerations, and Matt just kind of laid this all out. There's people have needs, and there's also the things that we have to have, and then there's the things that we want to have. And obviously public open space is one of those things that we're going to be dealing with. And I think there's a lot of ways that you can look at that, but funding those things isn't cheap. Maintaining those things isn't cheap. It requires staff and all those other things to have that kind of that type of infrastructure. And so so when you look at declining revenue and you look at increasing demands, it kind of puts us in a compromised position. And so this is one of the slides that was presented to me when I took the job, and this is why I was hired. And that is to look at the fiscal sustainability, and that there was an analysis completed prior to my coming that within the next decade, we're looking at somewhere right around a $3 million gap and shortfall between revenue and what our costs will be, and that's really based on inflationary. And we've seen inflation increase significantly. It's the escalation of public safety contracts. We know that firefighters, whether they're public or private, are always going to ask for more money, and they're always going to want to have a competitive wage. And so those are the things that we need to deal with. And then we're looking at our loss in revenues when we look at not only is it just this construction sales tax, but when we look at some of our state shared revenues, our shared revenues are also a component of our per capita versus the rest of the valley, and so our rest of the state. And as we stop growing and that continues to grow, we just get a less percentage of whatever that pot is. So we will see decreases or flattening of that revenue source.
Yeah, just one comment. So today, the governor signed a bill that prevents us from collecting tax on residential rentals. So beginning in 2025, we can still collect tax on the Hampton Inn or Savannah. We can still collect tax on STRs, but we cannot collect tax on, say, a residence that's rented for 30 days or more. So what does that mean to us? That means probably a loss of about $70,000 a year. So this just goes to show that we're under some pressure. You never know what the state legislature is going to do. And this was something that was actually defeated earlier this year. It was vetoed by the governor, but it came back and it was passed. So now we'll have to deal with that.
Yeah, so Alta Vistas, which is our apartments that we have here, that would be impacted by something like that. But that just shows you the volatility of sales tax as the way to fund services. Services are expected every year. We have a fixed cost on how we're gonna have to provide that, and we're doing that with a variable revenue source. And so we can bank on a lot of it, on some of it, but the reality is when you create an investment strategy for a town and how we're gonna look at that, you always have to look for diversity. And so one of the things as we looked at economic development, this is how we created that diversity. And we've had tons of conversations, but I like to reopen them up because we always have new people listening, so. So what is economic development? And I think a lot of people think of it as kind of a scary word, especially if it's got the word development in it. And I was actually talking to a friend here in Carefree who said, you know, you might want to just drop the word economic development altogether and try to find something else that's more suitable. And, you know, and I guess the way I look at myself is really not an economic development person and development, but more of revenue officer and investment. And so we got to look at how we're doing investment and revenue, because in typical economic development, you're focused primarily on job creation. You're bringing the next Intel into Arizona or the next, you know, semiconductor plant. And I spent a lot of time doing those things. But here what we're really looking at is really how do we generate sales tax revenue. And then how do we do that? And we look at sales tax revenue, it's just not about the money, but what are we bringing in and what's the quality of life? What's the services? What's that we have? The quality of our restaurants, the types of restaurants, the types of businesses that we have, all fit into that. And then when you really look at the end of the day, it's about wealth creation. And what we want to do, and you know, and it was kind of interesting, look at what Matt put together was they had that 3-piece, and you know, prosperity is one of the things that stuck out to me. And when you look at prosperity, it really is how do we create wealth within the community? And even if at some point down the road somebody had to go to a property tax, the more base we have, especially in it looks to commercial, the less anybody has to pay on a percentage basis. Now, I know that's taboo and I shouldn't have said that, but you got to be realistic, and so the approach that I particularly like to take when we look at all this is it's really just boils down to the 4 Ps, and I know you guys have heard this a few times, but it's the 4 Ps of marketing, and it's looking at our product, how we develop Carefree as the product and product development, the position that we have, how we promote our community, and then what's the price, what's the value proposition for anybody, whether they're a resident, whether they're a visitor coming in. It's how we look at all of our various different customers and what they get out of it. And so when we look at our product from an economic development revenue perspective, we look at our town center. We're focused in on destination stay, Hampton, Savannah, and then we've done the general plan amendment. And then we look at the regional retail, and that's the northeast corner, Cave Creek and Carefree Highway, and actually the northwest corner as well there. Now, one thing I want to show you, when you look at this number and you start adding up the numbers, it doesn't equal this. We're still short. Even with all of that, we're still looking at the potential of a shortfall over this period of time. And so, you know, we're limited on what we have left as far as resources and land. We're limited on what we can do at the town center. We're limited on those things. And, you know, we've always said this, once one of those things goes away or once one of those things is compromised, you never get it back. And so it's extremely important as we go through something like a general plan update, that we're very conscious about what we have left and how we're going to fund the services and the things and infrastructure that we want in the future. So I kind of want to get into the work plan, and what you were given for this 24 months is something that's already gone through process. It's been vetted through and recommended by the Planning and Zoning Commission. It took about 3 meetings to get through that. And then what you also have included are red lines that I've received from comments from council members who've already commented on the plan, and then things I've received from the community where they've said, hey, you might want to think about this, and some additional staff comments that maybe soften some things, where we say we're seeking to get something approved to be more like we're really seeking to have something considered by council, which is fair. And so what you'll see in that is primarily there were 2 things that have been redlined pretty heavily. One is going to be relating to short-term rentals and how that would fit in to the economic development model. And the other one was that the Planning and Zoning Commission wanted to put kind of dates on everything to kind of when these things would start, when they'd finish. And what we're finding out is it's very fluid. You know, we have things like elections and summertime, and people are in and out in general plan conversations. it's a 24-month plan, and I think the consensus was, let's just do what we can, and it's gonna happen sometime within the 24 months, and we'll evaluate that as we go over time. And so just kind of start with some of the accomplishments here. You know, we completed the town center redevelopment plan. That was actually came through the Village Center Master Plan, which was created in 2015. So really what we fundamentally did was took that plan and gave it the tools that you're allowed to get out of a redevelopment plan. And those tools are extremely powerful for allowing us to be able to do the things that we want, I think, accomplish here in the town center for revitalization. And in particular, it allows you to mix and match public and private money, which you can't do outside. And it allows us to buy and sell real estate in a way that we can't do if we didn't have the redevelopment area. So those are the two kind of things that we, and one thing I want to talk about that we've recently been able to do is, you know, when I started with the pandemic. So when I went to go build relationships with merchants, I really literally walked down an open street for like the first 3 months and wondered who was in that shop and who was there. And I think what did help is we contacted every single business collectively to kind of talk to them through what was being offered through the federal government as far as grants and loans, and that did help. But I'm happy to say that we really have started to put together a really solid retail merchant group. We've had our last 2 meetings where we probably had over about, Mary, you can say somewhere between 30 and 40 people. So we've had a lot of businesses participate, and I think they're excited about getting to know each other and understanding where, you know, the town is headed and how they fit in, and, you know, how they can get better business. A little bit on economic health. You know, our retail vacancy is at about 15%. You can see, obviously, Los Portales has been vacant for a while. CVS is obviously our recent vacancy. And then 11 Sundial Circle, our 5,000 square feet over here, the bank building has been vacant for a while. Generally speaking, most of our retail, though, and commercial space is fairly well occupied. Now, whether they're filled with retailers, that's another story, and that's one of the things that we'll need to be working on. We had seen sales tax growth since 2020. Again, part of that had to do with the pandemic, and the pandemic allowed, well, it captured people at home. So they were residents were ordering things from here, but it also kept people at home when they were ordering things online, and that had an impact on it. And then that spike you see there also includes the Hampton. So we get construction sales tax, they start sales tax, and so that's where we leave it off at the 23 estimate. It's higher, but I think a lot of that has to do with the incoming revenue that we're getting from the Hampton Inn. But
one question, so of the 15%, these 3 that you list here, Los Portales, CVS, and Sundial Circle, does that represent 90% of the 15%, or?
I would say, I haven't really looked at that, but that's probably about a fair assessment, you know. Okay. Yeah, I'd say that's our bulk of our vacancy is in those spaces right there. Now we have some functionally vacant, you know, like we have a space that's right next to the venues that's never open. And so it's got stuff in it, but there's no business being conducted out of there.
So Steve, I just want to clarify, in my opinion, that I think the huge uptick in 2021 also is attributed to the recent state law allowing us to collect online sales taxes.
Correct.
And many online retailers really weren't familiar, because all the states were doing it at the same time due to a Supreme Court ruling, but they were all phasing them in at different rates and over different time periods. And so the Arizona Department of Revenue was having to go back and notify retailers that they actually owed us money.
Right.
So there was, I think part of that is because it was money that should have been earned a year or 2 earlier, but the online retailers just were not either unwillingly participating, or they just were not aware of our phase-in.
Yeah.
So.
Thank you, Councilmember. Generally speaking, the economy right now is pretty stable. And so when we look at the economic data and the economic numbers, as far as the state and the country go, you know, we're in a pretty good place. And I think, you know, with the markets going up, I think public sentiment is pretty strong right now. The markets are a little bullish, and so I think that's a positive for Carefree. At this point, I don't see anything that's going to be majorly impacting us over the next 12 months at least. And so I want to kind of talk a little bit about town center revitalization. this is probably the bulk of the activities that we're working on right now, and I think it's a bulk of activity of what a lot of people have interest in. When we look at this net new target number, and so as part of the work plan, we're also required to put revenue targets for the activities for the work plan. So that's why these numbers are in here. And this $240,000 is net new that we're looking at that does not include the Hampton. This is looking at what we can do as if mile marker 0 was today. And that's looking at developing our existing vacant sites. If we redevelop Town Hall, revitalization of things like Los Portales, where we could actually maximize our retail. And then really just if we can increase the volume of traffic here and the volume of sales, we can increase the overall per square foot volume. And so I'd like to say this is extremely scientific, but you know, it's like anything, it's a pretty good best guess. And what you're seeing here is actually from the plan, and so I just wanted to kind of go through and talk about the plan, but I know this slide's got a lot of stuff on it, and this is really hard to see up there, so I kind of broke things down into individual chunks here. And you know, one of the things we're working on is, and this comes out of both the general plan and the redevelopment plan, is looking at circulation and parking. We know parking is something that we need to deal with, it's an issue. And circulation is one of those things where, you know, it helps visitors, it can be traffic calming, it can provide linkages from neighborhoods to communities, it can provide you know, pedestrian amenities, biking amenities. And so what we started looking at the circulation and parking is to look at this holistically in a comprehensive manner, instead of saying we need to fix this problem, we need to fix that problem. So what we're finding is sometimes is that this problem creates that problem, that creates that problem. And so the idea is to put the entire plan together, and then we try to figure out the best way to execute a plan like that. And so something to this magnitude obviously is not going to be cheap, you know, and so I think the numbers we're looking at probably would end up being somewhere in the $7 to $8 million range, and maybe even a little bit more. But these are things that we do over a long period of time, and there's ways that we find out how to pay for them. And the easiest way is to take vacant property and make them pay for it, or make them put those improvements in. And so that's where we can focus on. We can also look at, you know, how we fit this into capital improvement planning, and as we look at revitalization, redevelopment, and then maybe even if businesses over time and property owners see value to it in the area, this town center area can decide that they want to maybe pitch in and float some bonds and pay for something like that. So those are the things that we'll consider. The next one's signage. Obviously, we had both this conversation with signage and circulation, and those things have been tabled. And you know, signage is the same thing. It's one of those deals where it's we're looking at the overall plan. And you know, over time we've done signs like this, we've done signs here, we've done signs, and we end up with a bunch of signs. People don't even know they're there, or there's too many of them. They don't really functionally work together. And the signage piece of this is, how do we put a really high quality signage piece together that isn't grandiose, and that fits into the Carefree color schemes and models. And one of the comments I got I thought was pretty funny was from a resident that said, you know, we don't need signs everywhere are signs, do this, don't do that. Well, these aren't do this, don't do that signs. These are signs that are helping businesses, and I want to emphasize that the vast majority of our businesses here are Carefree residents. So we're helping Carefree residents create revenue so they can help pay for the services that we have. And I think it's extremely important to remember that they're invested into this town in a way, and some of these businesses, they got everything riding on the line on these businesses. So if we're not figuring out ways to help and reinvest into how we make these businesses better, or help them bring their customers to them, then I think we're leaving them short. And so that's really what the signage is about. I get it, people here know where they're going. I used to always say, I used to go to the airport for 10 years. I went there 2 or 4 days a week. I could literally drive myself to the airport. You know, to say though that you don't need signs to get to the airport and see that the planes are flying in and out, well, you still need signs to be able to figure out where to go and get off. And so that's kind of what this is about. And so,
you know, I think that the signage adds to the look of the community. I think that the signage package that we currently have ties in the arches, gives it a little more of a cohesive look, and I think it gives the town a fresher look. So I put a lot of value in the signage package. I think that for the town center, because we have such a variety of architecture, we need some unifying elements to tie things together, and I think that's a good one.
Thank you, Councilmember.
And I just wanted to add, the other thing is that we are a town that's totally closed in. And so we need to let people know that there's something in here. And that was I guess originally what the arches were for, but they didn't really do the job.
Yeah, and so, Councilmember Croyer, I think that's a really good point. The arches are great in context with other things. And so they were supposed to be done with pedestrian amenities and with other additional signage. So I think, you know, when we start putting that into context, when somebody realizes they're in an area, now their head's turning, they're looking for where they're going. Now they can see a sign that points them to the archway. The archway is now the gateway that takes them in. And now we've kind of completed that task of being able to get from where people want to go. You know, the funny thing I hear is how many people who live in this area and go, you know, I've lived here for 20 years and didn't even know this place existed. So maybe signage would help to even at least allow those people to know what's even in their own community. The revitalization program, one of the things that we put on the docket is to figure out ways that we can partner with private properties to reinvest. And so the way a lot of communities do that, especially in redevelopment areas, is that we take public funding and we match private funding in doing that. And that percentage could be whatever you want. It could be 10%, 20%. I would never go above 50%. Matter of fact, I think that'd be a gift if we went above that. But that's how we leverage private dollars to be able to paint buildings or patch, and a lot of they call them patch and paint programs, but it also allows us to do other things, landscaping, hardscaping, anything that helps improve these buildings. And it's usually application based, and you go through those applications, you can set whatever criteria you'd like to see, and that criteria could be that we want to see a higher quality of standard of building, and so we're helping them pay to take that building to the next level. It could be in some ways that we want better ADA access because we're lacking in some ADA access, or there's a lot of things that we can figure out, and it could be that those who get funded are the ones who provide the best leverage. You know, they're asking for 5,000, but they're going to put 40 in, versus somebody who's asking for 5 and is only going to be putting 5 in, on a match. So those are the ways that we evaluate that.
Are there, pardon me, is an area here, 'cause there's just some spots within the town, you walk by or drive by and you go, that's not good, like by the gas station kind of
Yep.
thing. That drives me crazy. But is there, some attention to that while we're doing all this over the next couple of years, that we could take some time, a little bit of money, and try and clean up some of these eyesores we have in the town while we're doing the other development?
Yeah, and Councilman Hatcher, that's one of the things that we're working on, and one of the ways we're working on that is working with property owners on alleyway, I'm going to get that a little bit, but alleyway improvements, as well as looking at ways to be able to provide additional parking. And so the stuff behind the Shell station, ideally, yeah, I mean, we're actually working with somebody on that right now to try to figure out a way to remove those buildings and potentially put parking in there. So. The other part of this is the CIP programming, and we went through the budget, and there's dollars that have been put towards the town center. Part of that will go towards CIP programming, and one of the things we're looking at are median and alleyway improvements and how we can work with property owners on improving alleyways, things like consolidating trash, putting trash dumpsters behind, screening walls, and ways that we can work productively to get that so it's not such an eyesore, it doesn't smell. And then we're looking at ways that we can improve our own medians, and particularly those on Easy Street and in and around town center that are just rock. They have little emitters sticking out of them. And, and I always say if we're going to ask others to invest in their properties, maybe we should look to make sure that ours looks up to snuff as well. And so we've looked at some improvements. We're focusing on the first 4 medians from Athens over to Ortega's to be part of where we'll put some pavers in, look at putting some benches and potted plants with cactus in it, something that doesn't require a lot of water. So those are the things we're working at. And I'll tell you, the property owners have been pretty good about working on the alleyways. It's slow and go, but it's getting there. The other one is the town hall site. And this is, I see, as a keystone site because we have full control over what we want to do there. And what we can do is really have the opportunity to look at the future use for that of what type of use we'd like to see, the type of development, the quality of development, the type of design, the architecture. And one of the things that we'll also be looking at in town center is the design guidelines and zoning changes that we're looking to make, particularly design guidelines. But as we go through a process to look at the town center and we look to put some type of request for proposals together, we can actually outline a lot of those design guidelines that we'd like to see in even our own site, and that could be the basis for design guidelines, what we'd like to see for the rest of the community. So we can actually set the tone with that particular site. And what that leaves us also with is, what do we have to do with town hall? And there's two options that really jump out at you. One is put town hall right here and just connect it to this building and then the 1,200 square foot office above. Or we can look over by where the water company is, where we own property. It's just natural that we can go someplace where we already have property and buildings and try to add on to that, which can reduce the costs. The idea is that we walk out of this at worst net zero. At best, we have recurring revenue that's going to be coming in from that particular site there, and hopefully not owe anything, or really doesn't cost us anything to move over here. The other aspect is, and this comes out of the conversation we had with the hotel and with other things that we look in the community, and is, you know, people have a keen interest on how design guidelines work within this town. And you know, we do have a unique opportunity with the redevelopment plan to look at just specific guidelines for town center. I think part of what ends up happening with guidelines is that what we try to do here gets tainted by what happens over in somebody's neighborhood. So paint color, for example, somebody's at their house and we tell them they can only paint their house X, Y, and Z, and it has to be a certain reflectivity. They go to court and say, I don't think so, and now these guys can say the same thing, and so we have to really soften up how we do that. But I think we have a little bit more teeth through the redevelopment plan to have the shalls and the musts, and we just have to stick to it. Now, can they challenge us as a statutory community? Sure, they could, but you know, we've taken that offline a little bit. I think we can at least make the best effort to try to make those design guidelines stick, and if we are doing what we're supposed to be doing with our own properties, I think it has a better chance of making sure that others are going to be complying with what those design guidelines look like.
I think our design guidelines have an opportunity to provide some teeth. You were talking about shall versus must do. So if we set up guidelines that are based on the town core, which are smaller glass intensive buildings, versus a building that is a resort that's out on the fringe, that's a whole different set of constraints. You know, there we can integrate the natural desert, and here we don't have that. It's, you know, it's entirely different. Scale's different, look is different, but that's where I hope to roll up my sleeves.
Appreciate the comment. The other one is zoning, and you know, for the most part, everything here is zoned commercial, and all this land was zoned commercial in 1958. It's hard zoned. Hotel was hard zoned, and so when we look at the opportunity for mixed use, and we look at some of the sites that we have, they don't necessarily work out to being commercial as being the best use. And so we've had developers who have asked to put residential on some of these properties. Through the redevelopment planning process, we actually identified certain vacant properties that have retail, residential / either mixed use, or it could be one or the other, was kind of the intention. But what we would look to do is having some type of zoning change that would allow for those particular properties that we've identified to be able to go through some type of special use or conditional use process, which however we decide that allows them to be able to do that particular project. Again, when you have something like that in place and they're asking for something, we can ask for higher quality, but we can also make trade-offs. Like say the site, for instance, Carefree Drive over here is one of the sites that's right behind where Carefree Plaza, where the Caring Corps is. It's got the wash running through it. It really isn't in a great retail space. We don't need any more office. And the guy who owns it would love to do some type of residential project there. You know, but it gives us the opportunity to work on how do we finish off some nice off-sites that allow for pedestrian access all the way from Tom Darlington up into the town center area. You put 7 units on there that are higher quality. It allows us to be able to have more of a negotiated conversation on how that gets done. Merchants, events, and marketing. You know, this is something that's, again, we've been working really hard on. You know, the pandemic really kind of shatters everything and took everything down and stripped it down to a level. And so one of the things we've been looking at doing is rebuilding the events and activities, starting with our core community events, And now we're starting to really pick up what these events and activities look like. We've added on Desert Foothills Theater. We're getting more music requests to go into there. And so we actually right now have started working on our scheduling, and we're pretty well booked. And then one of the things we're going to look at doing is putting music in every Saturday. We're working with merchants on opening and staying later for Friday nights. And hopefully that can morph into Fridays and Saturdays where people and businesses are actually open at night. And we could have somewhat of a nightlife. We'll never be Cave Creek. We're never going to have the bar scene. But at least when somebody comes, it doesn't look like they go to a restaurant and it's a ghost town. And so and that kind of goes back, and I didn't touch about this, the positioning strategy. One of the ways that we're looking to position the town is getting away from this drive-in, drive-out tourism. We're not Sedona. I don't ever want to be like that. The sundial is great, and I'm glad people want to come see the sundial, and it does generate, probably goes into business. But, this is why it's important to look at destination stay tourism, where people are coming here to pay us money to be here. They're coming here because they want to be here in Carefree. They've chosen this as the final destination of where they want to be. But the other aspect of that is who's the other customer coming. And that other customer is really, we need to focus in on the 20, 30-minute commute. That's a big point that I think we've really been missing. And so we compete pretty heavily with, North Scottsdale, we compete with Cave Creek and other areas, but I think we have a unique factor. And that unique factor is we do have this really cool small town, and we've got to maintain that. That is absolutely essential that we keep this feeling like this is the area's small town, and they can come to that. This is their Main Street. This is their Mayberry to some extent, but they can also come here and shop. It's a place that they'll never get to shop at, go to a restaurant they've never been to before. And then the idea is revisitation, that this always becomes on their mind of when they're looking for something to do. We're going to go to Carefree tonight. And it's not we're going to go to venues or we're going to go to Keeler's. It's we're going to go to Carefree and figure out where it is we're going to go. And that's the part that we're trying to look towards, because if we can just get 10% of the 700,000 people in that market trade area coming here, or on a monthly basis, we're doing pretty well. And so those are the things that we're going to focus on. Again, I just kind of talked about the destination stay strategy. Again, the net new retail you're looking at here is about 850,000. That's if we end up getting a resort on the corner at Carefree Highway and Tom Darlington. And again, that's a significant amount of money. And when we look at the destination stay strategy, I've kind of already talked about that these are people who are coming here and they're automatically spending not just 3%, but 6% of what they spend to stay here is going towards our revenue. So we get 3% sales tax and 3% bed tax. That's another reason why hotels and resorts are pretty popular for people wanting an economic development world, because not only do they do that, but they reduce the amount of traffic that you have, and they increase the opportunity that those people are going to spend more money on other things in your community, like restaurants and retail. One of the things I wanted to bring up here is we ended up getting some proposals for developers wanting to come in and build out residential communities that would be really geared around just short-term rentals. And so, what I want to do is just in the spirit of transparency, to let the public know and let council know that these proposals do come in. We're very, very helpless to stop somebody coming in and building on a Stage Creek Estates. If they were to go in there and build homes and do short-term rentals, the state law does not prohibit them. And so the question becomes, do we actively and proactively try to figure out a way to manage this, or do we manage it as it comes? And I will tell you right now, we had some early developers' heavy interest, and that's kind of gone away with the interest rates going up, so we've got a reprieve on that conversation. But it's one of those things that, just in the spirit of transparency, to bring up. The other positive to that is that they build single-family residential units. Everybody goes in eyes wide open, and we get all the revenue as if it's a resort. And it could be pretty significant. I'm not saying I support it. I'm not saying I'm against it. I think it's something that we just have to have as a conversation as we move forward, looking at the state land piece and anybody who makes application there, and then looking at that's the Stage Creek Estates. The other thing I want to say is that the applicant that was looking at state land was looking at a similar concept to this. And one of the things that we did ask for per the existing general plan is that to make sure that there would, if anybody were to take and develop that land, that we are promoting that we do have open space there. And that is what's in the general plan, that we negotiate that for anybody who's looking to replat that site. My guess is the way that's sitting right now is that land's gonna sit for a while.
I would just say on the short-term rentals, well, you're right in the fact that we can't stop them. The state government prevents us from stopping them. But at least for the ones that we have now, in terms of trying to manage them, it is a losing profit center. It costs us much more to manage them than we ever get from them. I don't see them as moving the needle very much.
Mayor, and that's one of the things as a community, I know we've worked really hard to mitigate the impacts of that. And so that's one of the things we'll continue to work on is I don't look at it as an economic development opportunity, to be honest with you. I just bring it up, put it in there because it was a point of conversation and it is a point of revenue. So that's the only reason why it was in there. And there's been a lot of people asking to remove that from the plan, that we should just leave it alone. And that's why you see a lot of red as it relates to that. But I did want to bring it up because I think it's important that people understand what people are requesting out there as far as our larger pieces of land are available. And then one thing that was brought up, and actually was brought up by Todd Cooley at the Hilton, but he's no longer there, was actually having some type of destination tourism board like a lot of communities have, where private money and public money are put together. We have a board of, someone from Savannah, the Hilton, and other, the Restaurant Association, however we put that together, where they would manage those funds for advertising as it relates to bringing a destination. That's the very beginnings of something like that, and Todd's not even here anymore, but I still think it's something that's valid and worthwhile pursuing, as we look over the next 24 months.
Steve, I just want to make a comment. I mean, this business of these guys coming in here and trying to, build out a small community of homes and so forth, so they can rent them out as VRBO and use our town for them to make money. I don't know about any of you, but I'm not interested in that at all. And I don't know if there's anything, I just can't imagine this council or our community thinking that's a good idea. Really.
Yeah, Councilmember Hatcher, this is the kind of input that I'm looking for as we move forward. And so we can either proactively talk about this as something we don't want, and we can try to find ways to mitigate that, or we can kind of let it go and deal with it as it comes. And so that's kind of the question I have of the council. Is that something you want me or the town to focus, the staff to focus on, as far as how we want to manage something like that if it were to come back again?
We're not here to be used for other guys coming in to make money. This is our town. I want to protect it. I'm not interested in that at all. I don't know about anybody else, but they can go straight to hell zone. Okay.
So
I don't want to support that at all.
Yeah, so they wouldn't encourage it. I mean, we can't stop them, but we shouldn't put out the red carpet for them.
Correct. Yeah, no, Mayor, Councilmember Hatcher, that's the direction I'm looking for right now. I'm not really out there encouraging anything like this, but when a developer comes to you and they've made application to the state, you got to figure out, you got to listen and try to see if you can manage.
Control that with our zoning.
Yeah, I think
Right?
the
Yeah.
overlay zoning could change so that it's, one dwelling per 2 acres or 3
Yeah,
acres.
I mean, we
and
control
then
the zone.
That's gonna eliminate
Or you could-
48 acres.
You can control the zoning, and you can make it one house per 5 acres, but it can still be a short-term rental in that house.
Yeah, but
You
it's
cannot
highly,
stop
highly
that.
unlikely with that circumstance.
Correct, but it's not unlikely for one house per acre,
Or smaller.
or smaller. But if the current zoning is one house per acre, they can come in and build houses and make them short-term rentals, and we can't stop them. What we can do is do our best to, I would argue, to discourage them. I mean, if you look at how much time we spend as a town trying to manage the short-term rentals we have now, it's terrible. Trying to get them licensed, trying to get them to respond to us. They live out of
Adhere.
our state. How do we find them? This is a
Yeah,
big
and
pain for us.
Adhere to
Yeah,
our
our town-
guidelines. Yeah, it's
Yeah, our town enforcement officer, he spends so much time on this. And what he's trying to do is trying to use, I'm not sure what's,
no.
okay, maybe I'm not speaking close enough to it. Okay.
Oh.
Well, certainly, we don't want to encourage them.
Yeah, Mayor, Council, and message received, I mean, it's not something that we're encouraging. Matter of fact, through the state land process, I think asking for the open space probably discouraged. Also, you know, the interesting thing about that state land parcel is it's kind of in a paradoxical situation, which is to the benefit of people who want to preserve it. When you look at the zoning doesn't match what the state is going to want to offer. So if you were at the state land presentation, they're going to ask for 1 lot per acre. The zoning currently is 1 lot or one house per 2 acres, and so there's a mismatch there. So somebody would have to buy it with the idea that they would have to rezone it. That's where we have ultimate control of kind of how these things occur. We have kind of the mandate through the general plan to try to extract some type of open space out of there right now, and so it does give us the opportunity. It's almost like it's in a holding pattern right now that is to the benefit for us to be able to make decisions on what we want to be able to do with that piece over the long haul. And so it's interesting as we have the conversation about open space and understanding the nature of how that state land actually sits today. You know, the state land already admitted that, like, look, we probably should have zoned it when we came in or had it zoned, but they didn't. And so it does work to the benefit of us being able to have a little bit more control, unless they come in and super zone it, which they told us they don't do. So,
I think we
but
should
they
just
could.
pass a guideline that any VRBOs have to finance all of our road resurfacing. I'll solve that problem.
There you go.
Gary would love it.
So kind of on just for time, we're looking at regional retail. You know, obviously this is our biggest opportunity, but it's also, you know, a lot of eggs in one basket there on that one particular corner. And the $1.2 million target you see here is really geared towards what is proposed by Empire on the existing site plan. And I'll be honest with you, one of the things we're finding out is that wash that runs through there and the cost to relocate that wash is like $7 to $9 million now. That's what we're being told. It's extensive, it's excessive, it's prohibited at least 2 developers from developing, and the only developer that was interested was one that wanted to build residential and minimize the commercial down to about 40,000 square feet, and that just isn't gonna move the needle for what we need to accomplish from a revenue perspective. So we're going to be working with Empire, you know, and they have come into us to talk to us about, is there any other way that we could look to phase the plan that allows them to be able to build retail sooner, and we can look at how we manage the wash situation. And maybe there's some kind of in between, or there's a way we can phase it where the wash gets, you know, they can build something, bring revenue in, and then relocate the wash at a later date. So that's one of the things that we'll keep focusing in on. I know everybody, oh, sorry.
There's already an ordinance that governs that property. All they have to do is build that ordinance.
Correct, but it's,
Each corner, or build part of it.
yeah, and Councilmember
ordinance.
Johnson, that's one of the things that, you know, we've told them is that there is the ordinance, that there is a site plan, and so they can build it to the site plan. It's how that gets phased that we need to look at, but, you know, and how they manage that on-site cost, which is, again, it's pretty excessive.
I don't think anybody cares how they manage it as long as they build to the ordinance.
Correct.
Or if they ask for a change, it comes before the P and Z and this
Yeah.
council.
And Councilmember Johnson, any change to that plan would have to come through for some type of
Sure,
approval.
and the wash, I think they've greatly underestimated what it's gonna take to move that wash. And at one point, they wanted to back it up to the community that lives there. And the Army, we checked with the Army Corps of Engineers. I mean, it's a monumental task. They may never be able to build and move that wash.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens, Councilmember Johnson. I mean, it's one of the things we'll continue to work with Empire on. I think they're keen on trying to get something done. They've been sitting on that land for a while now.
No,
And
I'm
yep.
on your side.
Yep, no, I
I
just
just
told-
wanna make it clear,
Yep.
2 words, Thompson Thrift.
Yeah, so, well, Thompson Thrift is gone, and
Good.
and I don't want to say anything negative about Thompson Thrift. They're a fine developer. They've done projects all throughout the valley, and they do what they do. And I'm not saying that they would have built a low quality product. It's just not the right thing for Carefree. And so we look at the one big one is what's going on with the CVS. I know I get a lot of questions with that, and you know, I'm not at liberty to say a lot of things about what's going on there. I have been talking with the building representative, and I've talked with a couple users, and I will say that I feel very confident that we're going to have something positive go into that space, and it's not going to take long, hopefully, depending on how that owner operates. But there definitely is significant interest in it, and it's very positive. And and so one of the things that I've looked at targeted timeframes, and this kind of goes down to the idea of how we manage the situation with Empire really is timing. And look, we want to be picky and choosy, but we also have a little bit of a gun to our head as far as our costs are going to go up. So we're going to have to figure out, at some point, making tough decisions or reasonable decisions that are going to allow us to get to where we want to get to.
Hey, Steve, who owns that building, the old CVS store?
It's just an individual owner.
An
Yeah.
individual owns that?
Yeah, it's an individual out of the East Coast. And one thing I want to talk about is we talk about that corner and the other corner and the resort corner. And I didn't mention this, and I wanted to talk about it. I know where it's a long conversation, but I know people are interested in that corner as well. There's a misconception between what can be done for that resort corner and what it is. And the reality is it has the designation of special planning area. And special planning area is a general plan designation. There's no hard zoning like we had over here. And through that special planning area, what we did on that corner was we set the future use could be a resort. And if it's going to be a resort, it's going to be based on these parameters. And these parameters were negotiated with the neighbors. They're based on what we didn't like about things in the hotel, like branded architecture. And so it's going to be a tough decision that we're going to have to make. But I think just want to let everybody know we put it in a position where we are in control of what happens there. We are in control because we set the tone through the special planning area that anybody who goes through zoning, if we don't like it, we tell them to go away. That's just the way this works because it's a special site and I know everybody knows it, and we want to make sure that we're doing the right thing for that particular location. And enhancing the business community, we're going to continue to work with businesses. One of the things, I actually drove over to Cave Creek the other day and tried to introduce myself to some of the counterparts over there. It's one of the things that we need to do is start working more cooperatively with Cave Creek. It's something our citizens have asked us to do, and so I think we should definitely be doing that. With Bree around, we're going to be working on our communications and continue to just work out the businesses and really start promoting them a little bit better within our own community and helping them throughout the community. One thing I'd like to point as success is our Third Thursday Art Walk. The art galleries have really gotten behind the Third Thursday. It's becoming a successful event, and we're going to be going to our 4th year, and everybody's excited. I think it's cool that they're, on the advertising side, will provide 50% of the advertising costs for 8 full-page ads that go into Images magazine. So we're making progress where they're actually putting some skin into the game, and they're seeing value. And I think every gallery, except for maybe 1 or 2, sold something this year. And if they didn't sell something, they ended up getting a customer with a commission. So. And this kind of comes down to, investment strategy as we look at a town. And the one you see there is Los Portales. This is something I pulled off the internet. When people look up Los Portales and Carefree, this is what they see. And so as a community, there's been this idea that we cut costs and we try to be conservative, and I don't disagree with that. I think every organization should always be running as efficiently as it possibly can. And I will tell you, from my experience of working with multiple communities and even in the corporate world, this town is run extremely conservatively. Gary has done an excellent job as far as being able to manage money, put money away, utilize one-time money, build a CIP program. I mean, everybody who's been a part of this as far as leadership should be commended for how that's done. But here's the problem, here's the thing, is that when we look at how we approach our investment strategy, you can take how Los Portales is, it's a low-cost approach. Minimal investment, it's got the same floor from 1983 and 1984, and maybe a little bit of fix from 1986. The air conditioning isn't turned on, the heat isn't turned on during the winter time. There's been very little investment that goes into it, and and it's been sitting at its vacancy or for however long anybody can remember now, and for the owner, it's okay. He gets just enough revenue because he owns it free and clear, and it works for him. What happens is the opportunity cost and opportunity lost for not doing something, for not putting that investment in. And then you look at Spanish Village, which was in the same condition as Los Portales was before the Raskins came in. And they put a little bit of money into it. They put signage on it. They branded it. They did all the things. They did all the 4 Ps, right? They built the product, they promoted it, they did everything that we're looking at doing, and it's the shining example of what happens when you put that type of investment in. It's sustainable. There's new restaurants there. There's vitality. There's life. But just as important, the opportunity gained by the community is huge. We're getting significant more revenue out of that than we're getting revenue out of Los Portales. That vacant space at Los Portales hurts Carefree residents.
But the individual that owns that, is my understanding, won't budge on any aspect of development of that property.
Yeah, and so this is an example of how we look at investment decisions as a town. You know, we put money in, we make smart investment decisions, we get money out. You know, so we can try to take the low cost approach as a town and try to squeeze the turnip, you know, and get as much blood out of it as we can. We can squeeze these small local businesses, raising sales tax rates or however we do. And at the end of the day, you get this. And that's kind of the point here. And I don't want to really get into the owner, because I personally actually like the owner to some extent who owns this. You know, he's not a bad guy. And he's made decisions on how he operates that, because there's been decisions made that he thinks in the community side that really weren't to his benefit. So it's incumbent upon us to be able to work with those types of property owners and figure out how we can engage them as a community and how we can engage them to be able to do things, because he's got the resources to do it. It's just how do we get him to a place where he wants to utilize his resources. And we do that collaboratively. We do that constructively. We don't, you know, this is not about, I really don't want to go, you know, and that kind of goes to where I want to end this all, and this comes down to public engagement. And this is something that's obviously in need for the community. I think people want public engagement, and how we do that is going to be extremely important. And with public engagement, for the things that I'm working on, this is a lot of stuff. And for myself and for staff, it's a lot. And, you know, possibly can't have all the ideas. We can't possibly have all the answers. And so we work with planning and zoning, work with council, but we also should be working a little bit more closely with the community. They have a lot of good ideas too. And, you know, they have a lot of ideas about density. They have a lot of ideas about quality. They have a lot of ideas about vitality on life. And so those are the things that we need to start doing. And so I know I'm proposing that we consider and start having more conversation sooner than later about how we want to approach this. And, you know, whether we create some type of revitalization stakeholder committee, which we talked about. We have quarterly open houses, which Mr. Braun brought up. You know, I think those things like that are very important for us to do, and how we can engage at a more conversational business transactional level with the community versus, you know, everything being Robert's Rules of Order. And then it's just working with, you know, Bree, and, you know, she's been fantastic, and so we'll continue working on that communication strategy. So for tonight, I'm not asking you to approve the plan. What I'm asking, you know, I gave you something to look at. I want you to take the next 30 days to be able to put some comments together based on the conversation. If there's members from the community that have commentary on the plan, I want to be able to get that as well, and kind of incorporate that, so something I can bring back to council in September. And then I would like for us to think about how we want to do this public engagement, or if there's a different forum we can put together that engages that involves the community about how they want to be communicated with, that we can put together and do that. I think it's extremely important. This stuff's important. And here's the other thing, it's fun. Doing this kind of revitalization stuff can be really fun if we do it right. One thing I want to point with the Spanish Village revitalization project, it didn't change Carefree. It didn't even change the nature of Spanish Village. It just made it more successful. And that's what we're trying to do here, is not change Carefree. And honestly, the idea that we don't want to be Scottsdale, I don't care about Scottsdale. I don't care about Cave Creek, and I don't care about Phoenix. I want to be the most unique, carefree, and the best quirky little town that we can possibly be, where everybody feels like it's their town, and it's all of our customers. It's the residents, it's our visitors, it's our businesses, and our property owners. So, with that, any questions or comments? Sorry it was long, but.
So, Steve, I would like you to add back into the actually written, not the presentation, economic development plan, the verbiage regarding the additional revenue needed, like by 2030. I think it gives perspective on and background on why we're going down this road. And it's primarily to maintain the services that we have and have the potential to increase services, but, you know, we saw the substantial increase in our fire contract in 2022, which is, you know, those things happen. And so I would like that added back in to give perspective. And then also, we, you know, when we get, so we're making, predictions which are very difficult about revenues that we're going to generate, which is, it's always hard, and you do a fine job at that. And then even though we, you know, the state collects all of our sales tax revenue and they remit them back to us, but we don't actually see the exact, we don't see that the Hampton Inn generates this or this retailer generates this. We don't get to see that because it's not public information. So when we're making, you know, when Steve's looking at, you know, what we think has been generated is what we think has been generated. It's not actuals because we don't have that data and we're not allowed to share that data with anybody. I just want to make that clear, unless anyone wants to correct me on that.
Councilmember Amoroso, that's the correct, and I begged and pleaded to get into the state revenue system so I can start doing some of that analysis, and they will not allow me. There's only one person, that's Jim, in our town, I think, that has access to that, and that's just for accounting purposes, and he can't share that, and he's sworn by blood to not talk about it.
The $1.2 million that you referenced here several times, I think Sheila's saying our development of our projects as they go forward should marry what the revenue is that we project that we're going to need. I don't want to overdevelop or underdevelop. I want them to match 5 years from now. I think that's what we're trying to do here, right?
Councilmember Hatcher, yeah, I mean, that's the intention is to try to maximize the amount of revenue we're looking at. Originally, we looked at the state land as far as economic development, because when you start looking at the revenue shortfall projection, even with what we have programmed now, we're still not meeting that need, and so we may just have to look at how service delivery is, or you know, and I mean, there's just things that we'll need to look at into the future, and so the idea is you know, maybe we can soften that or prolong whatever that inevitable conversation is going to be. But that is the intention, and so we'll try to maximize whatever we possibly have in a way that doesn't have an impact on you know, the quality of life here for the Carefree resident. So yeah, we're short right now based on the projection that we have. And
Was that a three-year or a 5-year? What was that?
that was 10 year.
The
1.2. So the 1.2 is, I think you're alluding to the regional retail.
You were projecting a potential revenue.
Yeah. So I mean, obviously, that's always going to be up to how that site gets developed. You know, I think it's reasonable to say that, you know, if things continue to go the way they are economically, the interest rates stabilize or even maybe drop a little bit and capital becomes a little freer, I think the opportunity to do something in the next 5 years is very feasible there. So that's what we'll continue to work on. And the owner is actively engaged in trying to figure something out, which is very positive. You know, after the 2 times these other developers have come in and can't make the economics work, so we'll figure something out.
So you're going to come back to us, this thing's working okay. You're going to come back to us in September and ask us to approve a plan, correct?
Mayor, correct. Yeah, and in the meantime, if there's an opportunity to talk about, or if you wanted to provide input on how we would like to look at the community engagement, and it may not just be necessarily economic development, but community engagement in general, you know, I think this is the appropriate time to do that, because I would like to get that as well. And so how that works, I think that's something that council can probably converse.
Well, I think it's in a critical path of moving all of these things forward to a finish line of whatever that finish line is. So I'd really encourage you when we come back in September that we have an answer of how this stakeholder committee comes together, what the charter is, whether it's signage or circulation and parking, the whole whatever the charter is, we can move this forward. Because I know we have people who want to be involved. Right? They've stood up and said, okay, let me join when you get on with it. And I think the sooner we get on with it, the better.
And Mayor, correct. And I think, you know, obviously when we look at anything, it needs to be diverse and it needs to have, you know, diverse opinions. And I'm not opposed to messy conversations, you know, and sometimes they get a little messy as long as we stay civil. You know, other people are going to have just different opposing conversations. We had that when we did the circulation plan. I mean, we had somebody who, you know, had a different opinion than a lot of the other group, but it was okay. So,
Any other comments or questions? Okay, Steve, great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I don't go anywhere. This one's gonna be really short, the next one.
All right, agenda item number 8, review and approval of the contract outlining the terms for extending the naming rights of the Sanderson Lincoln Pavilion.
Mayor, Council, just to keep this short, you know, you've been able to read the report. You know, we've had a 10-year relationship with Sanderson Lincoln for having naming rights on the pavilion. When they initially did the contract, we put a lot of investment into that facility for the shade sail structures, PA system, lighting, and everything else. You know, we've been 10 years, they've come back, and we've approached them, and, you know, we've been able to negotiate at this point just to kind of maintain the naming rights without having to do anything additional except just maintain the facility, which we would do anyhow. They'll pay us $15,000 a year, and that will be guaranteed for 5 years. After that, then there can be a mutual cancellation, and at the end of those terms, we can decide whether or not we want to go to a request for proposal to seek another partner or continue with Sanderson. But I will say they've been a phenomenal partner, and what this does is it allows us to bring in community events, and not, you know, if a nonprofit comes in or the Foothills Theater, it allows us to keep those costs down so we can run events, and even other events that come in. It keeps our costs down as we competitively look at as it being an event location, having that type of revenue, and it allows us to keep it, you know, up to date with all the PA system and all the electronics and AV. So with that, I will be seeking approval for, do I have to read the resolution, or
Did you say 15,000, Steve?
15,000 annually? 10 year. 10-year commitment. It's a 10-year contract with 5 years guaranteed, and then it's mutual cancellation after 5 years. Or I'm sorry, not mutual. It's anybody can cancel, either cancellation.
Optional.
Optional cancellation, yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, good thing about working with Sanderson are two things. One, their demographic is like our demographic, right? So we match very well. So if they bring people up here for an event they're doing or something, it's people who think like us, act like us, spend like us, and hopefully they'll spend money in our town. And secondly, when we bring in a nonprofit, Sanderson Lincoln is more likely to help that nonprofit, whether it's the Land Trust or Kiwanis comes on or anyone else, if they're a part of this, their name's on the building. So I think it's a very good thing.
Yeah, and Mayor, one thing I would like to add is that they actually fund other events. So they've funded, I think, $5,000 went towards Desert Foothills' last production, so they help underwrite that show. They've just been a great partner, and
School as well.
in schools as well, they fund us.
No, they've been a really good partner.
And Candace, do I need to read the resolution for approval? No.
No, just reference it.
All right, any other questions or comments? Okay, so I would entertain a resolution to allow me, the mayor, to sign the Sanderson Lincoln extension contract.
I move that we allow you to sign the contract to extend our relationship with Sanderson Lincoln.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, passes unanimously. Thank you. Thank you, Steve.
Thanks, Mayor. Thanks, Council.
Agenda item number 9, initial review of the Carefree Traffic Calming Program. Mr. Millstone.
Should have the thing.
So, good evening. My name is Mark Millstone. I'm the town engineer.
Can you hear, can everyone hear him? I just want to make sure you're speaking close enough to the mic.
Okay. Mark Millstone, the town engineer, here to talk about the traffic calming plan that was actually just born about 2 weeks ago, which was mainly pilfered from another town. I won't tell you what town. I do some of my best work with pilfering. But thank you for hanging around. And I heard a lot of really good questions earlier. And what I recommend is I challenge the residents to come make an appointment, and so we can sit down and discuss the policy, because again, it's a brand new policy. And I like to state that it's not my policy, it's not the council's policy, it's the town of Carefree's policy. So I don't know if the residents get the agenda so they can look at that. So I'm gonna rifle through this at the late hour. So there's a lot of administrative language as well as engineering language. But the two things the residents need to know is there are two forms. One is a letter of interest form, which would get signed and come to me. So what that would do is it would start the ball rolling. These would be locations that the residents feel are safety concerns, mainly about speed and capacity. So they'd like to implement some kind of traffic calming measures. And in a little while, I'll go over some of them. So it gets the ball rolling, it comes to me, we review it for conformance with the administrative engineering issues in the policy. And if it passes that stage, then we meet with the issuer of the letter of interest form, and we discuss actions we can take to amend the situation. A lot of the things, though, that are part of the requirements are like the traffic has to be between 300 and 3,000 cars a day. I'm not sure if we even get that in Carefree on any streets. So those are kind of things we'd have to look at. Let's just say it passes that. Then we get together with the issuer and we try to set up a petition which would include some type of improvements and some kind of costs involved with that. Right now, the cost sharing hasn't been figured out. And it depends, of course, about how large the improvements are going to be, how much they cost, things of that nature. So we won't have that information until we get to the petition stage. Excuse me. And then there's the issue about the petition, I believe, has to have 40% of the residents on the street in agreement to get the improvements done. But it also has to have 80% of the residents within a half mile of where the improvements are going to be done. Not sure if that's doable at all either. So these are big concerns. My impression is that, this is a first draft. Normally we have a second draft next month, but I think we need a workshop or residents to come in and discuss and help us figure out if the policy that we have going forward is the best policy to partake of.
So Mark, maybe you could just tell us why we're even doing this.
Well, and that's so Mr. Mayor, I can
That's a good
go.
answer, but I want it.
I can go ahead. So our first action was on Bloody Basin, and is it the plus hour? Okay, so these are the two forms we talked about, the letter of interest and the traffic calming petition. So this is Bloody Basin, our first take at doing traffic calming. It led to a call of action because there were serious, very serious safety concerns. And I took the impetus to put down improvements, inexpensive improvements, as quickly as possible, with the thought is we can always go later and ask for forgiveness. So this again is Bloody Basin. Everybody's probably familiar with the poorly designed traffic circles, if you even want to call them that. So we decided to make some improvements. And so the first improvement I made was the one on the left, which is called the speed bump, roughly about 3.5 inches high, 8 inches wide. And it requires the traffic to slow down to 3 to 5 miles an hour, if not come to a complete stop even. It was extremely aggressive, worked great. And so let me go back. Bloody Basin isn't just a speed issue, it's a capacity issue, and it's a cut-through issue. Everybody going to the lake uses Bloody Basin so they don't have to come up to Cave Creek Road and take a right and go all the way over. So it's a capacity issue too. So we used the item on the left first, which was highly aggressive. And although it worked really well, we got a lot of complaints. So we said, what else can we do? And that's where we took out the item on the left and put the item on the right in, which is a speed hump. So that's roughly about 1.5 inches high, 12 inches wide. Still a bump, absolutely, but it's a 10 to 15 mile per hour bump. So you can get over it a lot better than the one on the left. And then I just threw in, and I went a little crazy. So traffic calming doesn't just include speed humps and speed bumps. There's a myriad of other things that can be done. Things as simple as the middle picture as painting the speed limit on the road. The picture on the left shows chicanes, which I know the mayor loves that title, which are little islands that make you go around. So we take a tangent or a straight section of roadway and force the driver to slow down because they have to go through these impediments that are put on the road. The one on the right is essentially a curb bulb out. So again, we're reducing the width of the road and forcing the drivers to go slower. And one of the questions I did want to answer is, the question was, do we have a speed issue? And I can answer that very easily. I believe we have 3 speed radars in town. Is it 3 or 2, Gary? I know there's one at Tom Darlington. There's one on Stagecoach, and I thought there's one on Cave Creek.
Yes, they're the speed signs.
Anyway, so I go by the one on Tom Darlington every morning on my way to work. And you can just sit there and watch what speeds are coming through there. Nobody is going the speed limit or below on that, except for me. Only when I come up to the speed radar, I make sure to hit my brakes and make sure I get a green light saying I'm going less than 30 miles per hour in that area. So we definitely have speed issues. And it's not even just in the speed radar areas, it's all over town. Some more types of traffic calming improvements. We have a median improvement on the left. In the middle, we have some more curb bulb outs, which again are going to slow traffic. And on the right, we have what's called the speed table. So you would actually, your vehicle would actually raise up. This is included with a crosswalk across it. So it's good for pedestrians because the pedestrians also get raised up and are more easily visible throughout. But there's a lot of concerns about bottoming out if these aren't built correctly. So some more improvements. Again, we have a median that's at a skew angle. We have chicanes on the lower right. Again, you're taking a tangent section and forcing the cars to drive around that. So you're taking a tangent section of roadway straight and making it curvilinear. So that would slow traffic. A few more things. The one on the left is a little bit more aggressive than my speed bump, which would be to close off access to some of the roadways. And then the infamous being August and football starting, so the double football in the middle of the picture. Again, you're forcing cars to drive in a curvilinear fashion around a raised median. One of the benefits for such improvements is you widen the pedestrian space, you make room for furniture and trees, and you make a wider pedestrian zone as well as a frontage zone for the buildings. So that's important too. And I think my last slide, so if you can see this is the reason, Mr. Mayor, on why we did improvements on Bloody Basin without getting the data, et cetera. So this is an actual picture of a truck on its side on Bloody Basin This happened, I believe, October of '21. And remarkably, about 4 months later, we had another similar picture with another truck. And of course, these both happened on I think one was a Friday night and one was a Saturday night. So we don't know if they were impaired. We don't know what was happening. But this was my call to action to do something quickly. We did take a lot of flack for that, for not being transparent, for not getting the data, et cetera. And that's why we're here today, because the policy specifies that we need to come up with data. We can't do things in a vacuum. Gary and I are debating. Gary would like me to buy a loop detector for traffic. They run at a minimum $5,000 to a maximum 25 or higher. And then the data you get from them isn't easily readable, so it would take a long training period. And I actually was at a conference last week and was told, that a traffic data company could probably do one of the roads for about $500. So if you think that, we can get 10 studies done by the time we pay for one of the lesser loop detectors, it's hard to decide which way to go.
What's a loop detector?
Oh, a loop detector, you've probably seen them. They're actually tubes that go across the road. And so when a car goes over that, it takes a reading. There's air in there. And as a car goes over there, it takes you a reading, and that'll let you know that one car went by.
Oh, you're tracking the count of cars.
Exactly. Now, that does not tell you, it doesn't tell you a few things. It tells you how many cars. It doesn't give you a speed. And it doesn't talk about cut-through traffic, where they're going after they go over the loop detector. And so my next street that I want to do, I'll let you know, is Langwood Lane. There's a lot of issues there, a myriad of issues, and some of them is because it's a four-way intersection with the entrance and exit to Boulders Drive. So you got left-turning cars in both directions trying to get out onto Tom Darlington. There's often accidents there, fender benders. Lots of times we don't get any information about that, but my staff, my public works staff, goes through after a weekend and sees shards in there, pieces of metal, lenses from traffic, vehicle signal lights, things of that. So there's a lot of that going on. And I've also been told by the residents who are in constant contact with me that that is a major cut-through road for people going south on Tom Darlington to Carefree Highway, so that they don't have to wait at the light. They take a quick right, go up Langwood to Stagecoach, take a left, get out on Carefree Drive further on, so they don't have to wait for the light. And I can truthfully say that during the lunch hour, there is a backup southbound on Tom Darlington at that location. So again, even if we do a traffic data analysis, not going to tell us where the cars are going unless a survey is included with that. And that would mean they'd have to stop vehicles using the roadway and say, hey, where are you coming from and where you're going to? And I'm not sure how many people would be willing to stop for that scenario. So that was a quick version at the late hour, and I'm completely open to questions.
Yeah, I think a key point is basically why are we doing this? So when we get complaints for speeders, so we try to be responsive to the people who are talking to us and filing the complaint and bringing it to our attention. So we run out there and we try to put in a speed bump or something. And it certainly isn't arbitrary, but it's not necessarily scientific. And so we're trying to figure out a way to manage those requests, and we get them. Okay, you gave us a whole bunch of anecdotal situations.
Yes.
So we're trying to come up with a policy that allows us to manage that responsibly, right? So we certainly want to address the citizens' issue. We want to address problems that are real, so we have to determine if the problem is real or not. And we certainly want to make sure we have good public safety.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And that brought to mind, so we did have another complaint on Meander Road. I think it was Meander Road, from a doctor or dentist on that area. And apparently he has an issue with a teenager who's driving a hot motorcycle going, he's claiming 80 miles an hour. And I said, well, would you be open to speed humps? And he absolutely said, absolutely no. He didn't want to cause any issue where it would slow traffic on his roadway. So, yes. And the reason we use speed humps because they're very cost effective, very easy to buy and to have my staff put in. But any of the chicanes or raised islands, that would be something we'd need to go out for a contract with. We don't do concrete work. And the other issue that's come up is Rising Sun. We have 2 speed humps, asphalt speed humps on Rising Sun. We did a pavement maintenance project this past season, and one of them was decaying and decrepit and falling apart. So while we had the contractor out here and they were milling certain areas of road, we told them to take it out. And we were thinking that we were going to put speed humps in there, plastic ones, like shown earlier. We did put those up, the smaller ones, and we actually got complaints from, I won't mention names, but a couple of people have Bentleys, and they were having trouble getting over the smaller 1.5 inch speed humps without,
That's a stretch.
well, and there were 2 of them. So we were told we have to take those out, and so we did take those out. We are trying to contract with an asphalt company to put an asphalt speed hump back. But to let you know what's going on, the speed bumps, or the plastic ones, speed humps, cost anywhere from about $5,000 to $8,000 just for materials, and having our staff put them in. These asphalt speed humps go for about $25,000. And the problem with that also is we cannot get contractors to come here and do a small job like that. Unfortunately, the contractor VSS Industries, who did our pavement maintenance job, doesn't do those because we would have easily added that to that contract. So we're trying to work with other companies, but again, nobody wants to come into Carefree to do one asphalt speed hump. And that's probably why the cost is higher than it would normally be also.
So I do get, so traffic is pretty much the #1 issue, or speeding rather, is the #1 issue that people talk to me about at the post office when it comes to traffic. And I actually think this is a good idea because it gives residents a way to try to manage a solution with their neighbors. Because there's, certain people where every time they see me, they talk about Carefree Drive and people speeding up to work at Savannah or the golf course.
Yes.
And it's unsafe for residents to walk on the side of the road. And then there are other streets too. It's not just that, but that one seems to be very consistent.
Yes.
So I think it's a good idea to give people, get your neighbors together. If you all agree, then here's a process. But they all have to agree. Or a good portion of them have
Correct.
to agree. And so I think you're giving them an opportunity to look at a solution.
Thank you, Councilwoman
I would just
Amoruso.
caution, Mark, that we don't create a bureaucracy. Some things are a no-brainer, like Bloody Basin. I've driven that hundreds of times, and I know people that cut through there to go to the lake, bikers, people from out of town. So all you have to do is drive there to take a look and see that you needed to slow the speed down. And I know there were complaints. No matter what you do, you'll get complaints. And having been involved in traffic safety from a long time ago, I usually found, and it may make some people not happy, most of the complainers are the people that are the offenders.
Absolutely true. Thank you, Councilman Johnson. Yep.
Yeah, when the Maricopa County Sheriffs presented their annual report to us, they said, yes, people complain and they want us to come in and, ticket, but until they get the ticket, then they're not happy about it. question I have is how did we come up with the 300 number of cars?
So again, I pilfered that from a town not nameable, just because it seemed like a good number, but you're right. That's something we have to do more research on. And maybe we put some proviso on that because Carefree is much smaller than other nearby towns. So that's a good point.
And I don't want to stop traffic, but there are areas where residents are very concerned about safety, and I like I said, to give them a way to kind of go through the checklist
Sure.
and make informed decisions is a good thing, and nothing may come of it because most residents may not agree.
Yes.
But I think that it gives them some process to look at and
Right, and thank you for that. Everybody's using the same process. So we're not being discretionary on what we're doing. And the other point that I didn't talk too much about is the cost sharing. We at Town Hall feel it's important that they're active participants as opposed to people that just whine all the time. So they have to put their money where their mouth is. But the issue is, like Langwood Lane, for instance, it's a different scenario because I believe there's 8 residences on that stretch of road, of which 5 of them are rentals. So 3 of them are only truly long-term residents. And then the cost sharing, is it going to be 25%? Is it going to be 50? If it gets to be too high, nobody's going to want to do anything. And so there would still be a safety issue if nobody does anything.
Yeah, so-
that's a difficult one to explore. That will have to be explored about really what that means.
Yes,
Cost sharing,
thank you.
costs in general.
Yeah, so clearly there's a lot of numbers in here and a lot of variables and things to be settled. So it's just, we just roll it out tonight. There is a problem, and this is a tool that may help us manage the problem better. And so we look for public input, maybe the public input, if you read it, there's some things you might object to. You have ideas of how to make it better. We're not in a big race to do this, but it's when we put those speed bumps in, we got a lot of flack back. And
Absolutely.
Probably, if we had something like this in place, it would have been a more smooth process.
Yes, at least if we had a policy and we went through the procedure, we could talk to people and say, hey, this is a procedure and it worked and this is what the end product was. So yes, it's the days of, let's say, flying by the seat of our pants or being a call to action because of safety are kind of gone. We need to follow a policy that everybody agrees to. Thank you, Mayor.
Any other comments from council? All right, well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Agenda item number 10, adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, thank you all for sticking around.